Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining the September 2nd, 2021 joint special meeting with the Sustainability Commission and the Glendale Water and Power Commission. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council, as well as board and commission meetings, will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T Uverse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high-definition HD on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire devices, using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. And with that, welcome everybody, and let's do roll call.
Commissioner Karatunian? Present. Commissioner Kanjian?
Here.
Commissioner Kinderton?
Here.
Vice Chair Werner?
Here.
Chairperson Bartusov?
Here.
Ex-official Gang?
Here.
Ex-official Prado?
Here.
Commissioner Jasmadarian?
Here.
Commissioner Kidikian?
Here.
Commissioner Law?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson? Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
President Flanagan?
Here.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to the next item, Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item.
1B, the agenda of the September 2nd, 2021 joint special meeting of the Sustainability Commission and the Glendale Water and Power Commission was posted on August 26, 2021 on the bulletin outside City Hall. A joint special meeting of the Sustainability Commission and the Glendale Water and Power Commission is hereby called to meet at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, September 2nd, 2021, in the council chambers at 613 East Broadway, 2nd floor, Glendale, California, 91206, to consider the following items of business to wit.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next item.
2 actions. 2A, Sustainability Office and GWP Shoal Canyon Biogas Renewable Generation Project and final environmental impact report.
Thank you. Is there staff presentation, or how would you like to?
Good evening, Chairperson Bartusov and President Flanagan, and welcome to the Joint Commission to provide the Commissioners some information on the proposed biogas renewable generation project located at the Shoal Canyon landfill, and to provide information on the final environmental impact report. The proposed biogas renewable generation project includes approximately a 3-acre site, which landfill gas would be received, conditioned, combusted, and reciprocating engines to produce approximately 12 megawatts of renewable electricity. At this point, I'd like to introduce Michael Weber from Stantec Consulting, who provide the presentation for this evening.
Thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners, city staff that are present, as well as members of the public and others who are participating remotely on the WebEx. We do have a short presentation on the project background or description, as well as the California Environmental Quality Act process that has been conducted to date. We'll go ahead and run through that again. I am Michael Weber with Stantec Consulting Services, a consultant to the City of Glendale. I've been supporting the project through the environmental process approximately since 2015. So the proposed project is to generate electricity through the combustion of landfill gas at the Shoal Canyon landfill. The gas would be combusted in 4 reciprocating internal combustion engines. There would also be 2 additional pipelines installed as part of the project, a 2/3 mile long, 3-inch diameter natural gas pipeline, and an approximately 1 mile long, 12-inch diameter water pipeline, as well as 2 water storage tanks. The project would also entail decommissioning the existing 6-mile-long landfill gas pipeline that is connecting Shoal Canyon landfill to the Grayson power plant. No problem.
Just bear with us for just a second.
Would you like me to start over on this slide or just continue where I was? Is there a preference?
Go ahead, start
Okay.
where you were, yeah.
We'll start over on this slide in case those did not see it or hear. The proposed project is to generate electricity through the combustion of landfill gas at the Shoal Canyon landfill. The landfill gas would be combusted in 4 reciprocating internal combustion engines. The project would also include a 2/3 mile long, 3-inch diameter natural gas pipeline, as well as a 1 mile long, 12-inch diameter water pipeline and 2 water storage tanks. Project also includes decommissioning the existing 6-mile-long landfill gas pipeline that currently connects the Shoal Canyon landfill to the Grayson power plant, as well as destruction of harmful methane and other GHG greenhouse gases and landfill gases through the combustion process. Project has several benefits. It would provide the city with an additional 12 megawatts of electrical capacity compared to continuing to combust the landfill gas and waste flares that provides no economic or energy benefit. The energy or electricity generated by the project would meet the state's renewable standard portfolio and represents an additional source of renewable energy that reduces the need to purchase energy from other sources and increases the city's total power being from renewable sources. Project is designed to accommodate variations in landfill gas volume and methane concentration over time. This is just a photograph of what the existing facility and infrastructure currently looks like with the existing gas collection and flare station. And the main proposed project facility or power generation facility would be constructed in the same area. And that is depicted in the graphic that you see on your screen now. Again, this is about a 2-acre site. It shows the existing equipment, which is on the left side, as well as the new engines that would be a little bit further to the right side. And you also can see the water tanks that are 2 little black circles towards the right for fire water protection and potable water supply for the facility as well. This just depicts, again, that power generation facility, as well as the 2 pipelines. The yellow pipeline is the proposed gas pipeline, and the blue or tealish aqua line is the proposed water pipeline. And you do see the water tanks, albeit very small, in orange on the right-hand side of the blue facility boundary. The environmental review schedule has been quite extensive and has been occurring for several years. Wanted to just really summarize what has taken place to date, and going back to August and October of 2017, the city noticed an initial study and mitigated negative declaration for the project. In March of 2018, the city responded to all comments that were received and presented a final mitigated negative declaration to Planning Commission for consideration of adoption. At that time, Planning Commission requested an environmental impact report to study alternatives to the proposed project. In March of 2019, the city noticed another initial study, the second one that was completed, and a notice of preparation of an environmental impact report. The next month, in April of 2019, the city held public scoping meetings for preparation of the EIR. In July through October of 2020, the city issued a notice of availability of the draft EIR and circulated it for public review. In August of 2021, the city has successfully responded to all comments received on the draft EIR and has now noticed and issued a final environmental impact report. That brings us to today in September 2021, presenting the project and the environmental review background to the Glendale Water and Power Commission and Sustainability Commission. The next steps, we plan in October of 2021 to present the final EIR to Planning Commission for consideration of certification. In the initial study, the following environmental resource categories were determined to have either no impact or less than significant impacts. That was to aesthetics, air quality, energy, greenhouse gases, land use and planning, noise, public services, transportation, utilities and service systems, agriculture and forestry resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, hydrology and water quality, mineral resources, population and housing, recreation, and tribal cultural resources. Some of those were excluded from further analysis in the initial study. Some of those were carried forward, such as air quality, greenhouse gases, just as a couple of examples, and those were evaluated in the EIR as well. The environmental impact report concluded that there would be less than significant impacts with mitigation to biological resources, hazards and hazardous materials, and wildfire. The draft EIR did not determine there would be any significant and unavoidable environmental impacts associated with the proposed project. I'll cover some of these briefly. I just want to talk about some of the mitigation that has been built into those three different environmental categories to make sure that they remain less than significant impacts. For biological resources, implementing a worker environmental awareness program, implementing a range of best management practices. There are a lot of those, just as a couple of examples. Not driving vehicles or equipment outside of the authorized or approved limits of construction or previously disturbed areas, picking up trash, capping pipe ends so they're not left open overnight so wildlife can crawl into them, and a range of other things, including safe equipment fueling practices, not doing it anywhere near any streams or wetlands as well. Also, doing biological construction monitoring to make sure that these conditions are adhered to during construction of the project. There are additional requirements to conduct pre-construction floristic plant surveys for sensitive species, pre-construction surveys for nesting and breeding birds, surveys for reptiles, and implementing monitoring, avoidance, and minimization measures related to those sensitive species if detected during the pre-construction surveys. Conducting pre-construction bat surveys, providing suitable roosting habitats for bats if indeed they are determined present, and excluding bats to roost prior to construction to make sure that they are not directly impacted during construction activities. The project does include the removal of some vegetation, and there is a requirement to replace all native vegetation removed as part of the project at a ratio of 3:1 or 2:1, depending on the mitigation strategy that the city selects. For hazards and hazardous materials mitigation, these are largely related to the construction phase, training the workers in all of the requirements in terms of the mitigation, fueling practices, where they can and cannot go, making sure that all the equipment is maintained in good working condition, not dripping oil, fuel leaks, things like that, putting drip pans underneath them, making sure that all of that equipment and any hazardous materials are stored in one place that is properly equipped with secondary containment and emergency cleanup equipment as well. And again, the refueling practices as well, making sure that that equipment is not fueled close to any sensitive habitat and in those service areas as well. Wildfire mitigation, there is a requirement that the contractor will have to prepare a fire protection plan for the construction phase and have that reviewed and approved by the city prior to initiating construction. There would be no smoking or open fires permitted during construction, and there would have to be a firefighting water supply maintained on site during the duration of construction activities. The EIR, and as requested by Planning Commission, considered a number of alternatives to the proposed project. There were 4 of them that were evaluated in the draft EIR. Alternative 1, no project, doing nothing and allowing the continuation of existing baseline conditions to continue. Alternative 2, converting the landfill gas to natural gas, essentially pipeline quality natural gas that could be injected into like the SoCal gas, natural gas system. Alternative 3, converting landfill gas to liquid natural gas, LNG. And alternative 4, locating the engine generators at a different location than the Shoal Canyon landfill. And for the alternatives evaluation in the EIR, we did evaluate placing those at the Grayson power plant. I'm going to spend a few minutes walking through a comparison of the potential environmental impacts of the proposed project compared to each alternative. You will see in this table whether it meets the project objective and compares the environmental impacts to the proposed project, and the determination being whether the potential impacts of the alternative would be less than the proposed project, similar to the proposed project, or greater to the proposed project. You see here, would the alternative provide beneficial use of naturally occurring landfill gas, which is the objective of the project? Doing nothing, alternative 1 would not meet the project objectives. Alternatives 2, 3, and 4 would all result in a beneficial use of the LFG and would meet the project objectives. Okay, comparison of alternatives. We have aesthetics in alternative 1, and I'll just go through each alternative. And I think we have some slides that have alternative specific text as well. But for the no project, we would have less environmental impact to aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, noise, and transportation and traffic. There would be similar environmental impacts to agricultural and forestry resources, cultural resources, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, utilities and service systems, and wildfire. Alternative 2 would have less environmental impacts to aesthetics, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, noise, and wildfire. It would have similar environmental impacts to agricultural and forestry resources, biological resources, cultural resources, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, utilities and service systems, and wildfire. Alternative 2 would have greater impacts to energy, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, and transportation and traffic. Alternative 3 would have less impacts to air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and that's it. It would have similar environmental impacts to agricultural and forestry resources, cultural resources, mineral resources, noise, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, and utilities and service systems. Alternative 3 would have greater impacts to aesthetics, biological resources, energy, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, transportation and traffic, and wildfire. Alternative 4 would have less environmental impacts to aesthetics, biological resources, land use and planning, and wildfire. Alternative 4 would have similar environmental impacts to agricultural and forestry resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, hydrology and water quality, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, transportation and traffic, tribal cultural resources, utilities, and service systems. Alternative 4 would have greater environmental impacts to air quality, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, and noise. You can see from this list that there are a lot of environmental categories, and the city has put a lot of effort into studying the potential environmental impacts of those alternatives compared to the proposed project. Would like to note that alternative 2 was identified in the EIR as the environmentally superior alternative, meaning of all of the alternatives that were evaluated and considered in the EIR, it would have the least amount of environmental impacts compared to others, particularly in some key resource categories such as air quality, greenhouse gases, and noise. This is just a slide of alternative 1, just a snapshot of what we just talked about. Same with alternative 2. Same as alternative 3. And a summary of alternative 4. Be happy to answer any questions.
So why don't we, Ted, what do you think? Should we take questions from the commissioners and then move to public comment, assuming we have callers?
We do.
Okay. Can you tell us how many we have?
We have 4.
Okay. What do you? Yeah.
Very good.
Should we go ahead with questions? Sure. Let's. Any Sustainability Commission members have questions for staff?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering, I was looking at topic response number 1, where the report mentions that the project was designed and equipment selected to, quote unquote, maximize economic beneficial reuse of the landfill gas at Shoal compared to burning off the landfill gas. What is the anticipated return on investment where GWP would break even on the cost of building the biogas project through savings by using the gas instead of burning it?
If I could just ask the commissioners to introduce themselves, please.
Oh, I'm Rhonda Werner, Vice Chairman of the Sustainability Commission.
Unfortunately, I am most familiar with the environmental impacts of the project and the CEQA process, and that is just something that is not considered as part of that process itself. There may be somebody else on the project team, Maurice, or somebody on the engineering team. Would you like to speak to that question?
No.
Phone can't hear. Oh, there, I think I hear it now. Thank you. Hello, commissioners, President Flanagan, Chair Bartrasoff. My name is Maurice Altaguera, Environmental Program Administrator for Glendale Water and Power. The approximate cost of the project is about $40 million, approximately. And I think, Mark, we were kind of trying to estimate the cost of buying replacement gas what was it, about $4 or $5 million a year?
We look backwards at 19, 20, 21, and we're, in order for us to be able to recoup that energy, it's about $5.3 million a year. So if things were to go consistent, 5 into 40 is 8 years. We anticipate the prices of those commodities that we would be losing, which is bucket 1 product because it's renewable, and the energy component, which is about 100,000 megawatt hours. We anticipate that to go up. So at the worst case would be 8 years at the current numbers, but we anticipate it to be shorter.
Okay, about 8 years, okay. And but that economic benefit would degrade over time as the amount of landfill gas dissipates over time, right?
Yeah, that's a fair assumption. Moving forward in the future, slowly the gas production will go down. So yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Okay. And also I was a little bit perplexed by part of the EIR. Like on the one hand, the project was considered a independent project, and in other cases it was looked at more as a upgrade to the facilities, and so it seemed a little bit like it was saying conflicting things. So for example, with on topical response number 2, when people were asking why the landfill gas can't continue to be captured and piped to Grayson as it has in the past, the response was simply that the project wasn't part of or same as or a direct or reasonably foreseeable consequence of the Grayson repowering project because it could operate independently. And on that basis, it was considered to have independent utility and not be part of this whole thing. So it just seems odd that it wouldn't be reasonably foreseeable that the projects are connected when they're physically connected by pipeline. So I just thought I'd put that out there. So is it considered the same, or is the biogas project a completely new utility then for purposes of the EIR?
You want to take that one question?
Commission President and Commission Chair, Commissioner Werner, this is Jillian Van Meiden, Chief Assistant City Attorney. I'm acting as counsel for the Sustainability Commission. There is a legal test for independent utility, and one of the aspects of that test consist of determining whether or not the project can be operated with entirely separate permitting, whether or not Grayson exists or did not exist. This project could be built and operated and permitted separately. It's not dependent in any way on what happens at Grayson, or if Grayson, for example, were to shut down, this project could still operate and would receive, like I indicated, separate permitting. And that's one of the bases under which independent utility is determined. So it is not necessary for Grayson to proceed in order for this project to proceed. It is not included in the Grayson project description. Biogas doesn't include Grayson in its project description. And it can be reviewed as its own CEQA document, which it has been as a separate project. The projects have undergone separate environmental review. They serve different purposes, and they can be implemented independently from each other. This is supported by a long list of case law. It's not dependent on the approval of the Grayson repowering project. It's not dependent in any way on that approval or implementation of that project. It serves a different purpose from Grayson. It will operate independently from and be separately implemented from the Grayson Power Project. Those are some of the bases upon which the legal standard of independent utility can be applied for purposes of the CEQA analysis. Happy to answer any
Okay.
additional questions should you have them.
And the same was true for the landfill, like a potential landfill expansion or something as well, I believe, right?
That's correct. The production of methane will continue to occur whether or not there were or what is or is not a landfill gas expansion, Shoal Canyon landfill expansion project. As indicated in the responses to comments to the final in the final EIR, the city's commitment to an expansion of the Shoal Canyon landfill was withdrawn. And that is not considered a related project to this project that we're looking at here. That is the biogas renewable project. But regardless of whether it were expanded or not expanded, the bottom line is that landfill gas still needs to be collected. If it's flared, it's not put to beneficial use. So the purpose of this project is that landfill gas capture, and this project serves that purpose.
Okay, thank you. So would it also be the case, well, all right, let me back up. So when they say it serves different purposes, that also had me scratching my head too, but I'm not a power plant engineer by any means, but it seems to me that Grayson could fulfill 3 out of the top 5 purposes of the project if the landfill gas were piped there instead, like providing the beneficial use of the naturally occurring landfill gas for power, utilizing the renewable energy resource to help the city meet its renewable portfolio standard, and also using the existing transmission system to deliver generated electricity to the grid. And then first uses, purposes 4 and 5 would just go away because they would be using the 6-mile pipeline instead of abandoning it, and they wouldn't have to build a new plant because they have one. So he's putting that out there.
Commissioner
Also-
Werner, the feasibility of that particular alternative was analyzed in the biogas renewable generation project EIR, and I will turn over the technical response on that particular analysis to Michael Weber from Stantec.
Thank you, Jillian. Yes, that was alternative 4, relocating the engine generators at another location, which we did consider the Grayson power plant. Yes, it would meet the project objectives. Yes, it's potentially feasible or physically possible to do. However, it would result in greater environmental impacts than the proposed project. And for example, a couple of key resource categories that the city continues to get questions and comments and or concerns are related to air quality and noise, for example. And by placing the engine generators at Grayson Power Plant, you'd be placing those in an area that is already heavily burdened with air quality impacts from the Grayson Power Plant, adjacent freeways, and other sources, as well as placing that equipment much closer to residences that would increase both potential health risks from an air quality standpoint, as well as noise impacts compared to the proposed project, which those sensitive receptors are substantially a greater distance away.
Right, but the Grayson power plant is in the process of being upgraded, so they wouldn't have the same, outdated engines that were originally looked at and was the original reason why they stopped using the 6-mile pipeline, right, was because the aging engines weren't able to efficiently burn the fuel. But wouldn't a newer, fancier, cleaner engine be able to burn it in a way that was more clean? And the whole Grayson purpose of the additional EIR on that was to look at ways to mitigate the environmental impact. So once all that's upgraded, who's to say that the impacts, even if everything was burned at Grayson, wouldn't be lower than it is today?
Yeah, in the alternatives evaluation, I think we're talking almost about the 2 different projects as well. So the Grayson power plant, as Jillian just explained, is a totally separate project going through its own CEQA evaluation. When we look at just relocating these engine generators to Grayson rather than Shoal Canyon, the same emissions would occur in terms of the mass of emissions that could affect both the atmosphere and sensitive receptors who may be living nearby. But by placing them at Grayson, you're placing them substantially closer to those receptors. So those residences would be exposed to higher concentrations of pollutants than if the engine generators were located at the Shoal Canyon landfill. So it's almost it's the same project, just different locations. And because of the location being in a heavily urbanized and residential area, and much closer to those, the impacts would be incrementally higher.
Well, I worked at that business park for over 20 years. I believe it was also referred to as an industrial area in the EIR. It's office buildings, train tracks, freeways, that sort of thing. So, just for the record, it's not residential immediately surrounding that location.
Just on the north side of the tracks, there are residences. So they are substantially closer. I don't have the distance in front of me, but I believe that's measured in hundreds of feet away from the Grayson power plant, where we have residences located in the thousands of feet away at the Shoal Canyon landfill.
Okay.
There would also, one more note on that, there would also be more energy utilized to push the landfill gas to Grayson compared to not having to utilize that energy to push the gas to Grayson and just combust it on site. So there would be an energy savings as well.
But wouldn't some of that be offset by not having to build a separate, a whole entire pipeline separately? Or two pipelines, the water line and the other 1.5 mile line?
The pipelines themselves are very small. I think you saw it was a 12-inch diameter, which is bigger than the 3-inch. The 12-inch diameter water line, as well as a 3-inch diameter natural gas line. They're all proposed to be above ground, essentially, except for road crossings. And the installation or construction of those pipelines as such would be a very minor activity in terms of construction.
Okay. So those are my questions for now, but I reserve the right to speak later.
Thank you, Rondi. I see Heike would like to ask some questions.
Quick question. There's no power plant there today, so if we are to build a power plant at Shoal, doesn't there need to be transmission capacity built as well to get the power out? How would you transmit that power to distribution lines?
There are existing electrical infrastructure right there at the site, and essentially, once the electricity is generated, it can be tied right into that existing infrastructure. There would be no need for any new transmission lines whatsoever.
Thank you.
No more questions from you, Heike? No more questions?
One more question, if you don't mind. How long would the construction take at Shoal, approximately? And will the access be from the golf course or from the LA side?
I believe the construction duration is estimated at approximately 18 months, about a year and a half. The primary access would be up Shoal Canyon Road, not the golf course.
Any other sustainability commissioners that have questions or comments?
One more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What measures can be taken to minimize the impact during the construction to the residents? It's a very narrow canyon. If you go up from, let's say, the freeway all the way up to the proposed site, what measures can be taken to minimize the construction? No one likes to have construction equipment going through their neighborhood, but it's necessary. So can there be measures that we can implement to minimize the impact on our residents?
There perhaps could, from a California Environmental Quality Act perspective, we typically see construction noise and construction traffic and air quality as the primary concerns for environmental impacts during construction phases. For this project, we did a traffic study for construction that concluded that the incremental increase in traffic associated with construction would not exceed any applicable level of service standard for an affected roadway or intersection. And the trip numbers are below the City of Glendale's threshold for requiring a vehicle miles traveled study. We also conducted a construction noise assessment. That assessment determined that no sensitive receptors, including the residences, would be exposed to noise levels that exceeded a significant threshold, and that was approximately a 5 decibel increase. So all those potential increases would be less than that. So very slight increase that would be noticeable, if at all, by residences during the construction, as well as the air quality concerns during construction. The South Coast Air Quality Management District has what is referred to as localized significance criteria for construction emissions. We quantified the air pollutant emissions associated with construction, compared those to the localized significance thresholds. In some cases, those emissions did exceed those thresholds, but those are solely used for screening purposes. If your emissions are below those, you can conclude that there would be no potential air quality impact. If you are above those, it does not necessarily mean there would be a potentially significant impact. It just requires an additional level of study. So as part of the EIR, the city did conduct what's referred to as an air quality impact analysis to show the dispersion of those air pollutants from construction. That analysis concluded that there would be no sensitive receptors exposed to pollutant concentrations over any threshold established by State of California and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
Oh, it might be helpful to mention or to define what a sensitive receptor is, so that the public will understand what is meant by that.
Yes, good point, and thank you. Sensitive receptors, we're typically looking at residential land uses. It could be schools, elderly care facilities, things like that, where people are commonly at, and or groups of people that are more susceptible to those types of impacts than others. But when we talk about sensitive receptors in terms of air quality and noise, it's almost always talking about it in a human receptor context. When we talk about sensitive receptors for biological resources, it's typically the species themselves that are the sensitive receptors.
All right, so I'll move ahead with some questions unless there are other commissioners that wanted to ask questions.
Chairman Boutrous.
Alec, can you not hear me?
Oh, now she's coming
now
through.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Several comments and questions. The Shoal Canyon accepted green waste until very recently for use as ADC, which is alternative daily cover. So one of my questions is, compared to other landfills in this area, how long do you anticipate Shoal producing enough methane to operate this power plant without having to supplement the landfill gas with more than, say, 3 to 5% gas from other sources? How many years? Because if it's a $40 million plant, you've got a payback period, but how long will this generate sufficient methane to make that plant viable without having to supplement gas?
We did have access to recent data, a study conducted by SCS engineers on the Shoal Canyon landfill, and they looked at landfill gas volume and methane concentrations over time. They also looked at 2 different scenarios, one without diverting green waste and one diverting green waste. Not surprisingly, the one that shows a diversion of green waste, also shows a corresponding reduction in landfill gas volume that's being created because that green waste is not there anymore to continue to create the landfill gas and methane. As part of that, when we looked at the environmental impacts of the project as well as the time frame that we would expect landfill gas to be available to generate electricity in the engines, we did use the forecast without the green waste or with the diversion. And that shows that through 2040, 2045, there would still be enough landfill gas to operate at least some of the engines without a substantial input of natural gas augmentation.
Okay, so 20, 25 years roughly. One other question, Vice Chair Werner alluded to this. I believe the Shoal project, consideration for the Shoal project started before the city made a commitment to renewables and trying to achieve 100% renewables. So I understand that the EIR was crafted separately. I understand these are standalone projects, but I'm just a little concerned, shouldn't they be fully integrated as far as our renewable energy planning? That concerns me somewhat that they're not a direct question, but I just want to make that comment. And my other question is, I work for the city of LA, and one thing we are doing is evaluating industrial facilities, wastewater treatment plants, landfills, things of that sort that the city owns for the installation of solar PV. That the EPA, I believe, issued a report on PV at landfills a few years ago, and I know there's some concern about the stability of the surfaces. But have you looked into solar? It seems if you're going to go to the trouble of constructing a $40 million plant, I would also utilize that opportunity to put solar PV in a very large, industrial scale facility at the same time. Has that been considered?
Photovoltaic solar was considered for Shoal Canyon landfill. I was not involved in that study myself, so I may ask Maurice to come up and speak to that. But agree that that was a settlement-related issue with the landfill continuing to settle over time. There were some very big structural challenges in building a facility like that, and I believe the city did speak with at least one or more suppliers of those types of systems or projects, and they had the same conclusion and did not think that that was a viable solution.
Yeah, that I think that was several years ago, and one of the reasons why it wasn't feasible was because the landfill was still open. So it was we didn't have a lot of land available to install the solar panels. That's one reason, but there's also some settling issues. But there's some landfills in the United States that have closed landfills that have successfully installed solar. So it is possible, but one of the reasons why it was not really looked at was because the landfill was still open. So that's something that I don't know, Mark. It's something that we can definitely consider down the road.
I don't think it's either or.
Right.
Could be both.
Yeah, definitely. And you could still have a park with some solar. There's lots of options on the table. So thank you for the comments. Definitely something we'll take to heart.
Jennifer, do you have any more questions or comments? I can't hear you in case you're speaking. Okay, in case you do, we can come back to you. So I can ask some questions. One thing I do want to get clarification on, because not everybody's intimately familiar with the EIR process. The slides that you had comparing the different alternatives uses verbiage like less than significant, greater, similar impacts. But I did hear you say at some point that ultimately a technical determination was made that one of the project, if it was the project or one of the alternatives, was the most environmentally sound. So how do you get to that technical conclusion from where we are looking at these charts to that level of determination, and with what confidence?
Very high confidence. And We chose to use the terms greater, similar, or less because we did not evaluate each alternative in the same level of detailed analysis as we did the proposed project. And that's really what an EIR requires you to do for alternatives. So I can say with great confidence that for each one of those categories, we logically came to a conclusion whether it would indeed have less or greater impacts comparatively. As an example, going back to like alternative 4 compared to the proposed project, even though it had the same emissions or same noise, because alternative 4 would be located closer to those human receptors, they would be subject to incrementally higher noise and air quality impacts. We stopped short of suggesting whether or not that would be a less than significant impact, a significant but mitigable impact, or a significant and unavoidable impact. One of the challenges of being able to do that is these alternatives haven't been designed. They're conceptual in nature, so we don't necessarily have the same level of detail and engineering available for the alternatives as we do the proposed project.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking at, for example, I know from the community, fire is a concern. And under wildfire, you have less than significant impact with mitigation. Is that, am I assuming that with mitigation is simply the water tanks that you're including as part of the project so that fire can have access to that in the event of an emergency?
That's correct. And that is only one part of it. There was a fire design basis report that was completed as part of engineering. So it goes beyond even the water tanks in terms of access and the width of the access corridors through the facility to make sure that the fire trucks and responders had adequate access. Everything was designed to meet applicable California fire code as well as City of Glendale. There are a lot of other engineering aspects built into the design. The example I would give is all 4 of the engines would be placed in enclosures. They would be equipped with fire detection systems, automatic shutoff, and if there were a problem or a fire in one of those engines that is already in an enclosure, they would be equipped with inert gas systems that would essentially put that inert gas in that enclosure and extinguish the fire. So quite a bit of thought has gone into that. And also want to note that the City of Glendale's Fire Department has seen that fire design basis and has approved it.
Okay, that's helpful to hear because I recall during the presentation that you had mentioned that during the construction phase, there weren't concerns about wildfire, and I just thought to myself, I don't think folks are necessarily concerned about construction, but the fact that this power plant is going to be here for decades, and the concern is what is the wildfire risk as that power plant exists. One of the questions that stemmed from previous comments is about the use of these proposed 4 engines or units and their productive use over time. So I heard 2040, I heard some of the units could be used up until that date or beyond that date. I'm specifically interested in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and I am not necessarily enthused about the idea of using natural gas or landfill gas well into the 2040s and its associated air quality impacts. So has there been thought put into reducing the footprint of the power plant in conjunction with flaring to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from this proposed project?
The greenhouse gas emissions associated with the proposed project are not substantially different than those that occur today as a result of the flaring. So it is equivalently the same. There was a very minor increase, and I was just looking at those numbers. I want to say that Going from the existing conditions to the proposed project, there would be a net increase of, I want to say, 52 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. So when we talk about 52 metric tons, that may sound like a large number, and I certainly don't want to suggest that it's insignificant in any way, but the significance criteria that is used for purposes of CEQA in determining whether there is a significant greenhouse gas emissions impact is 10,000 metric tons a year. So the only way that I think you could avoid or substantially reduce those greenhouse gas emissions is not combusting the gas at all. But under current conditions, it's being combusted in the waste flares, and you are getting all of those greenhouse gas emissions emitted into the environment with no benefit. And the benefit, one of the benefits of the project is, and I do agree, it is the same greenhouse gas emissions that would be let out into the atmosphere because you're still combusting it. You're just combusting it at a different technology. But the benefit of getting 12 megawatts of electricity out of that is the state of California recognizes that and encourages that as a renewable energy supply. So it does meet the renewable portfolio standard eligibility requirements.
And does that hold over time? I know there's requirements brought forward by the state in 2030, 35, 40. Does the definition still apply during those imposed restrictions?
I'm not necessarily familiar with the specific ones that you're talking about, but I'm not aware of any change that's being proposed that would make that no longer eligible for the renewable portfolio standard eligibility. What does potentially impact it is if natural gas is used, I believe the threshold is more than 10% of the total volume to generate electricity, you no longer get the full renewable portfolio standard credit.
And when is that projected to happen as part of this project?
Based on the current design of the project and the gas curves, we don't expect it to happen. We expect to, those engines will go out of service prior to that date occurring. And that's one of the benefits of the project, and I think the design team did a very good job of being able to adapt to the changing landfill gas conditions, because it does change, seasonally and year to year. So with each engine able to generate approximately 3 megawatts of electricity, as the landfill gas volume decreases over time, there will be a decision made to either, one, take one of the engines offline, possibly only operate 3, or operate 1 or more engines at a reduced load as well. And as that landfill gas continues to decrease over time, the engines will essentially be retired or taken out of service. But you'll still be able to get that maximum renewable portfolio standard eligibility for what landfill gas the city has there and is required by law to manage.
Okay, so you think that 10% threshold we won't get to that point well before 2040 or anytime after that?
That's correct.
Soon after that?
That is our understanding based on the gas curves that we have seen, yes.
Okay, and so are you saying that we would be emitting more greenhouse gases if we reduce the number of engines or units and flared more of the landfill gas?
Your greenhouse gas emissions would be equivalent whether you're combusting the landfill gas in the engines or the waste flares. However, the environmental impact report evaluates greenhouse gas emissions during the absolute peak or worst case year, where there is the absolute most landfill gas being produced. The curves that we have from the SCS report that I mentioned previously suggest that that would occur sometime between 2025 and 2026. So all of the impacts you're seeing in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and air quality in the EIR are based on that annual combustion. But it will decrease after that. So as it decreases, you will have a corresponding decrease in greenhouse gas emissions as well, solely because we are combusting less landfill gas over time.
Okay. One of the other things that I've learned about as trying to study this project is this idea that the landfill gas can be sold to another utility like SoCalGas. Can somebody speak to that and perhaps talk about what the pros and cons of that option are?
Yes, and that is alternative 2 that was studied in the EIR. The Southern California Gas Company has, I believe, what is referred to as like Rule 30, and don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it is. And it specifies the characteristics or quality of natural gas that we would have to demonstrate for them to take it into their system. And you have to clean it up substantially more than one, combusting it in the existing flares, or even cleaning it up to a standard to burn in the internal combustion engines and generate electricity. So there's more equipment associated with being able to do that. That comes at a cost. I certainly can't speak to the economics about it, but just the space that's required for that could be substantially greater. As well as no matter where you're generating that natural gas, you've got to build a new pipeline to get it into the SoCalGas system as well. Go ahead, Mark.
Mike, I think they're having a problem hearing you. Can you talk closer to the microphone, please?
Yes. Yeah, so was just mentioning that there's a lot more equipment and effort that would go into cleaning up that landfill gas to that high of a standard, and then also having to build a new pipeline to get that into the Southern California Gas Company's infrastructure, which has its own set of potential environmental impacts. That's one of the nice things, that we do have these smaller natural gas makeup lines in the water line, but they're very small above ground in comparison to, you're probably looking at a several mile long new pipeline within urban, residentially developed, not residentially per se, but in a very urbanized area that has its own potential set of potential impacts.
So I don't know where a SoCalGas facility is, but we do have a pipeline that goes from Shoal to Grayson. Does that in any way affect that calculation about constructing a new pipeline through an urban residential area?
It really doesn't. There is that existing pipeline. I would have to have one of the engineers speak to the compatibility of that with natural gas, or perhaps you could send landfill gas through there, clean up the natural gas somewhere else. But no matter where you're cleaning it up or sending it, even if you're using the existing pipeline, that pipeline does not connect into a Southern California Gas Company transmission pipeline, and that's really what we need to get into. So you would still have an additional pipeline that would need to be constructed.
Sure. I guess your answers are leading to more questions. How is that alternative not environmentally superior to burning this gas at a power plant near residential homes at Shoal Canyon?
I would have to bring up the slide, and I'd be glad to do that if you want for the comparison. And I think what it will show is that alternative, thank you, that alternative would have some less environmental impacts than the proposed project, and quite frankly, to some key environmental categories. But it would also have greater environmental impacts in a number of categories compared to the proposed project. And let me look at what those are. Is alternative 2.
I don't know how easy it is. Can we go back to showing that slide just so the public is following along? Is this the right slide that you want?
Yeah, this is the right slide.
Okay,
so
thank you.
alternative 2 is converting the landfill gas to natural gas. And again, maybe I'll just go through these again real quick, and I'll just highlight the ones that are less, ones that are similar, and the ones that are greater. So converting the landfill gas to natural gas and getting that into the Southern California Gas Company's infrastructure would have less potential environmental impacts than the proposed project to aesthetics, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, noise, and wildfire. It would have similar environmental impacts to agriculture and forestry resources, biological resources, cultural resources, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, and utilities and service systems. Alternative 2 would have greater environmental impacts compared to the proposed project to energy, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, and land use and planning, and transportation and traffic. The alternatives analysis included in the final EIR does include text describing the logic and the rationale to reach these decisions.
Thank you. I guess I'll have to look at that a little bit more closely. I know we're bound to the very strict confines of an EIR analysis, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around making a recommendation to our electeds when we don't have associated costs for these alternative scenarios. So if you're not able to tell me that what the cost of this proposed alternative is as it relates to the preferred option, I'm not sure how to confidently give a recommendation. So I understand that we're working through this as an EIR, but it is frustrating.
Chairman Bartrasuf, Commission, members of the Commission, President Flanagan, members of the GWP Commission, you tagged an important issue, and with respect to CEQA, the guidelines for CEQA state that an EIR is not required to study a comparison of environmental costs and benefits. And the only direct comparison required in an EIR is a comparison of the project alternatives, and a cost-benefit analysis is not required to make that comparison. It's really a project question as opposed to a California Environmental Quality Act question. And that's why the Stantec team is not in a position to address a project cost comparison issue. It's not required to be analyzed in CEQA, only as it pertains to absolute project feasibility. Yeah, obviously, you could build anything if you had all the money available in the world, but that's not the issue. So I'll turn it over to.
Yeah, one additional important point is at the beginning of this EIR process, myself and one of my consultants, Les, we contacted the gas company. We requested a meeting. They asked to see our gas quality data. We sent it to them, and they were not entertaining any option to clean up the gas because of the quality of the gas. So we could not even entertain even getting a cost estimate because they were not, they basically flat out said they're not interested in the gas.
Okay, but if you understand the thresholds and the requirements that SoCalGas has, the city could do an analysis to determine what the cost would be to clean up the gas to bring it to SoCalGas's standards. So I understand what you're saying, but I feel like we have an incomplete story here. And I'm not here to give you a hard time. I'm having a hard time having confidence in giving a recommendation to council based on the information that we have. So it's nothing against you, but that's just the way that the process is working.
No, I appreciate that. So, one of the reasons why we looked into it so carefully is through the public process, because, we did an MND before that. There's a lot of public stakeholders that really wanted that evaluated, so we were pushing a little bit harder than we would. And I don't know what else to do. I don't know how else to entertain the gas company and taking our gas. I was surprised they were not in. I know, Jillian's saying, if you spend enough money, you should be able to do it. But the fact they were not even interested in even meeting with us to discuss it as a potential option was a surprise to me.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I do have a question about process. I know that this is going to go to the Planning Commission, and I understand this project would need a CUP. So when this goes to the Planning Commission, are they recommending to move forward or to certify the EIR in addition to a CUP allowance, or is that a separate process? Is it happening at the same time?
Yes, members of the commission, the certification of the EIR is a prerequisite to taking any action, discretionary action on the project. So they would need to certify that this environmental impact report before they could act on the CUP or the special recreation zone permitting.
Okay, and those two would not be happening at the same meeting?
They would be happening at the same meeting.
Oh, they would?
Which is fairly typical with a project that comes forward, is that you entertain the CEQA review, whether that's the EIR or the MND first. That's the first action that's taken, and then consider the project entitlements following thereafter. It doesn't have to occur at the same meeting. The EIR or MND could be approved at a separate meeting, and those entitlements could come at a later meeting. But so there's an option. At this moment in time, they're scheduled to occur at the same meeting.
Understood. And I suspected that. I sometimes I ask questions so that the public understands where we're coming from. And so I want the commissioners to understand that we are going to make a recommendation today to council. It is then going to go to the planning commission, and then it'll go to council. So I understand that we're looking at this from an EIR lens.
If you don't mind me interrupting, I just want to correct that process.
Yes.
It would go, the agency making the final determination on the certification of the EIR and the project entitlements is the planning commission.
I see.
Those decisions are appealable to the city council. The decision about the approval of the project, and that is related to funding, is the city council's decision. This is just the land use entitlements and the environmental review that would go to the planning commission. So just so that's
Yes,
clear.
thank you. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
For
Sorry to
clarifying
interrupt.
that. Okay, I want to make sure that the commissioners understand that this is our opportunity to express to council, I would say, how we feel about the project, and make sure that the commissioners understand that. And while this is about an EIR, this reaches beyond that as well. So unless there's any other questions or comments from our commission, I can pass it on to Ted. Yes, please.
I have one more.
Okay, let's be brief with our follow-up questions, and then we can move on to the next commission.
Well, it's not so much a follow-up as another issue, but so as you mentioned, the CEQA doesn't look at the same things as, say, the Glendale Municipal Code, for example. So when the EIR says there's no aesthetic impact because they're only looking at views of the primary ridgeline from public spaces, the Glendale Municipal Code makes no such distinction. In fact, it goes on to say that the primary ridgelines, in other words, what you see when you look at the mountains silhouetted against the sky, that this is an inexhaustible and precious scenic resource of the city, and that citizens worthy of preservation for the welfare of all citizens of Glendale, and that's quoting directly from the Glendale Municipal Code. So the reason I was asking at the beginning, like, is this a separate project of independent utility and all that, is that because in the EIR, they're saying that they're exempt from impacting the primary ridgeline because they're a utility. Well, the exemption only applies to the maintenance, upgrading, or improvement of an existing utility. And this is not, as was mentioned earlier, an existing utility. This would be a new project of separate and independent utility. So I don't think the exemption is meant to apply to that. It's more like, a line needs to be extended. When property is subdivided, obviously you need to get power to it, that sort of thing, but not this whole entire new project, which would be on the primary ridgeline. So I just wanted to put that out there as another source of concern that I have. And if they care to respond, I'm all ears.
Yeah, in the EIR, in terms of the aesthetics evaluation, there is a line of sight analysis included in there, where we modeled where the proposed facilities would be visible from the adjacent open space and residential areas. And if you look at that, you'll see that in most cases, the views would be obscured because of the mountainous terrain, particularly from all sides except from the south. And that what would be visible would be very little in terms of facilities. The exhaust stacks on the engines, which go up to, I believe, close to 40 feet above the ground surface, as well as the 60,000-gallon water tank. Those may be visible from some discrete areas. In my professional opinion, I don't think that that substantially changes the visual character of that ridgeline. And as you see in some of those photographs included in the EIR, there are already some existing facilities from the current footprint that are also visible. I'm going to ask Dennis Joe to speak a little bit more on the utility and the exemption that you asked about as well.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, other commissioners, members of the public. I'm Dennis Joe. I'm from the City of Glendale's Planning Division. Just to speak about the exemptions in the Glendale Municipal Code to allow for modifications to a utility. And just to go over the definition by our municipal code, it defines utilities and transmission facilities, which we're defining this existing facility as, it means a facility for which production, storage, transmission, distribution, or recovery of water, sewage, energy, and other similar utilities. So the project location is located in the SR zone, which means our special recreational zones. And within that land use table, it does conditionally allow new or utility land uses. And we're considering this, and we're defining it as an existing utility. So we are allowing that exemption within the Glendale Municipal Code to expand the existing utility. So as a result, the project is going to be going before the Planning Commission for the conditional use permit, as well as the SR review application to review the project in these special recreational areas. So just to provide that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Quick number one suggestion, number two question. Number one, when we talk about 12 megawatts, the average resident does not, cannot quantify what that translates to. So it would help for our residents and commissioners to say, how many houses does that power? If you don't mind commenting on that. And number two, is this going to be 12 megawatts of base load, or is this a peaker plant that's going to be used during 5 and 9 p.m.? You can comment on that as well.
Mark, I'm happy to comment and also defer if you've got further information.
Thank you, because I'm not really sure how many houses in a megawatt. Sorry.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with city staff earlier today just about the 12 megawatts and really what does that represent. I'm not intimately familiar with all the city mechanics on it, but I believe what I was told is that this would represent, the power generated would represent almost 10% of the city's entire electrical load. And if accurate, that's a pretty considerable number. So you would be getting approximately 10% of the load from a new renewable energy source. It's going to count towards your renewable portfolio standard numbers, which the city is continuing to try to increase. The landfill gas is continuously produced. So it's my understanding that this would be more base power and not peaker. It would be continuously producing power at that equivalent rate.
All right, thank you very much. Ted, do you want to take it away?
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bartrosif, and thanks to all the Sustainability Commission members for allowing us to crash your party, so to speak. We're delighted that you're in existence, by the way. We've been waiting for you to come into existence, so congratulations for that. So I'll just start off before inviting my fellow commissioners to ask questions, just to say that on behalf of our commission, we really appreciate all the work that's gone into all this environmental analysis. I mean, spending hours over the past couple weeks reviewing the EIR impresses me, the depth to which we've gone and studied this issue. So I really appreciate that, and also appreciate all the community input. It's quite fantastic to, I think there was 142 questions from people in the community, all answered, diligently answered, but it shows a lot of concern. So with that, I will shift to our commissioners. Commissioner Lal, do you have questions this time?
Yes, thank you, Commission President. I do have a couple of questions. Could you just confirm the size of the project site?
The main power generation facility would be approximately, I believe it's 2.2 acres, slightly over 2 acres. There would be some additional development, I believe well under an acre for the pipelines. And then there is also a requirement per the fire code to maintain a 100-foot vegetation clearance around that power generation facility as well. So that adds into some of the site size. There wouldn't be any development there, but it would be actively managed to reduce vegetation and brush. And I believe that was about 5 or 6 acres or so.
So the total project site is in excess of 6 acres?
That's correct, but only 2 to 2.5 would have true development on it.
Would have construction on them. Okay. And what is the overall size of Shoal Canyon? What is the acreage of that facility? In other words, what is the footprint of this site on top of the footprint of Shoal Canyon?
I believe that the Shoal Canyon landfill has a total site size of over 500 acres. Part of that area has already been closed and turned into recreational use in terms of a golf course that occupies some acres. I don't have that number in front of me, but I believe that the active landfill portion remains at several hundred acres.
Okay, thank you. So this project comprises a very, very tiny physical space in comparison with the overall layout and acreage of Shoal Canyon as a whole.
That's correct.
Okay. It's my understanding that one of the reasons that the Shoal Canyon gas cannot be used at Grayson is because landfill gas, for a lack of a better term, is dirtier than gas that comes through, for instance, regular commercial gas lines. So how is the equipment that would be used at Shoal Canyon, how is it different from equipment that would be used at a plant that would be burning what we would call, like regular gas?
Well, there are
or is it the same?
I'm sorry.
Or is it the same? That's my question. Is it different or the same?
Yeah, there are different types of generation technology that could be employed. Turbines, for example. It's my understanding that the primary reason that landfill gas is not continuing to be combusted at the Grayson power plant to generate electricity is because that was being combusted in boilers, essentially steam boilers that are capable of burning that. And those do not have, they're very old units dating back to the 1940s, 1950s. They don't have state-of-the-art emission control systems like we have on modern generation equipment. And as a result of that, as part of the Grayson repowering project EIR, the city had evaluated potential air quality impacts of that project. We received some questions on how would those potential air quality impacts compare to the existing facility operations at Grayson Power Plant. That led that project team into evaluating that further. And as a result of that study, determined that there were some concentrations of pollutants that were of a concern and actually exceeded some of South Coast Air Quality Management District's notification requirements and required some sort of resolution or mitigation to reduce those emissions. So in the engines that are proposed as part of the proposed biogas renewable generation project, those would be equipped with selective catalytic reduction and oxidation catalysts that will substantially clean up those emissions to a much higher standard than the landfill gas emissions were previously treated at the Grayson power plant.
Okay, thank you. On page 1.3 of the final EIR, under the section discussing air quality and greenhouse gases, there's a description of new regulations that came into play from the South Coast Air Quality Management District that would require the change or upgrading of equipment used to flare natural gas or methane from biogas facilities. So is it the case that if this project were not built, Glendale would have to build new flaring facilities to meet that requirement, or has that already been done? I'm not sure if I understood what had been written here.
Yes, if this project was not carried forward and landfill gas continued to be flared at Shoal Canyon, there is an upcoming South Coast AQMD regulation that would mandate those existing flares be replaced with newer, cleaner burning flares. If the project does go through, the requirement is if a certain amount of landfill gas is combusted in the flares, then they would have to be replaced. I don't recall exactly what that number was. I want to say that it was around 20% or so. But it is also my understanding that those flares are operated by Los Angeles Sanitation District, and they have already decided to replace those flares and either are preparing an application to South Coast AQMD to do that, or have prepared it and already submitted that application.
Yeah, just to clarify, the sanitation districts are the ones applying for that permit for the new BACT flares they're going to put in regardless of this project. And that decision was made after we started this. It's a very recent decision. So they are going to install a new BACT flare regardless of this project.
And BACT is best available control technology.
Sorry, yeah, best available control technology. I didn't want to get technical, but thank you.
Okay, so in terms of this project, that requirement is really neither here nor there, because it doesn't substantially influence, what would happen if no project were built.
That's true today. When we wrote this, originally it would have, because we would have stayed below the threshold of the new rule if the 4 engines were installed. But now, since we've made that decision, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe one additional comment to add to that, if you don't mind, that our EIR evaluates the worst case possible air quality impacts, and that assumes that the flares are not replaced. So the excess gas, landfill gas, that could not be combusted in the 4 engines during the years when there is more volume than they can combust, the excess would essentially go to the waste flares. And we've already concluded there will be a less than significant air quality impact under that scenario. And if the flares are replaced with cleaner flares, you would even have less air quality emissions than are forecasted in the environmental impact report.
Okay. Just to touch on an issue that was raised by the Sustainability Commission, where is the closest connection to SoCalGas's infrastructure?
Yeah, I don't have a specific location. Is there anybody else on our team that has? Yep, okay. Bear with us 1 minute.
Good evening. My name is Les Toth. I'm a mechanical engineer working for Stantec and therefore for the city. The issue with gas, natural gas, to the gas company, it would have to be introduced into a transmission line. Grayson takes gas also from a transmission line, SoCal gas transmission line. So taking the gas to Grayson will not solve the problem. You'd have to take the gas to San Fernando Road and the freeway corner. There is a vault there that the gas company has. You could take it to there. To back up a little bit, the problem with making natural gas, there's a chart in the EIR that shows all the different constituents required for natural gas and what we have. Cleaning that to that degree is near impossible. The technology does not exist. Removing nitrogen, removing oxygen takes a lot of water, a lot of technology, and it's a pain to do. I don't think the city, in my opinion, wants to do a project that is not really proven yet. That's my take on this.
And then have to transport it 6 miles.
You would have to, you'd have two options. One is compress the gas to about 500 pounds at Shoal Canyon and transport it through the city streets all the way to that corner of San Fernando and the freeway. Or the other option would be to clean the gas at Shoal Canyon, transport it to Grayson at a low pressure, and then compress it to 500 pounds at Grayson and take land at Grayson to put these high pressure compressors, which will take significant power. And then you could transfer it from Grayson and build a transmission line to this location at the corner of San Fernando Road and the freeway. You'd have to cross the railroad. You'd have to go along San Fernando Road. We looked at that. And I've talked to the gas company, and they are adamant we have to clean the gas to their rules. And that's not an easy thing from an engineering point of view. You look at the amount of CO2, the amount of oxygen, nitrogen, and you have to take the methane content, which is 36%, and remove all this stuff and increase the methane to 98% approximately. Not an easy thing to do. That's from an engineering point of view.
Commissioner Lal, in addition to that, the siloxane levels are extremely high. And we found that the siloxane levels were destroying the compressor pumps, the impellers, and we were continuously having to repair them. So as we were bringing it down, we were losing about 25% of the energy as a result of compressing it and bringing it down to Grayson.
So would that be losing 25% in comparison with burning it on site?
That's correct.
You would lose,
So
I'm not
that's
sure the
significant.
percentage, but you will lose a substantial portion by cleaning it up. Lots of energy is required. You have the numbers, I do not have those numbers.
Those numbers were really based on actually transporting it to Grayson, not the energy required to clean it up to pipeline grade.
Which is even higher. And then Grayson doesn't require 500 pounds. Grayson requires, at those boilers, maybe what, 40, 50 pounds?
That sounds correct.
And then we'd have to go all the way up to 500 pounds. That's a lot of energy. Yeah, and I don't know of any landfills in California that's doing this. Everybody's making power. I'm reluctant to recommend to the city to do a project that's really experimental. I don't think that's the business the city should be in. Any other, ma'am?
Not regarding gas, thank you. That was
Thank you.
Very illuminating. Can you talk a little bit more about the transmission that's available at the site? Is that transmission, is it sort of capped out at 12 megawatts? Is there more availability on the lines there? Should a solar project or another project be built there in the future? Does it leave open the possibility that in the next 20 years, perhaps, the project site could be reused for cleaner energy?
Let me talk a little bit about the transmission system. Today at the landfill, there are substantial large equipment that creates suctions for the landfill gas so that we don't have any emissions.
Les, I think she was referring to the electric transmission.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. What I'm trying to say
I like
is,
the details.
I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is that there is substantial power being used at the landfill today. There is a transmission line that already goes to the landfill that has the capacity to handle the amount of power that will be generated at the landfill. So we don't see any new transmission lines being built from a technical point of view.
But is there additional capacity for future solar development or for future development on that line?
I don't know, but when we looked at that line, we looked at it specifically for this power plant. We analyzed that line. We went all the way back down into the substation, and we know there's sufficient capacity in that line to handle the power. I do not know about anything else. You guys, you may.
I'm not sure, but there is a right-of-way to allow us to get that energy from the landfill gas area to one of our substations. And I think we're using the terms a little loosely. It's not a transmission line, it's a distribution line. So it's a low-voltage line as opposed to something where we see, 230 kV. This is a small feeder level line. So we don't see any problem with the existing, but we would also like to look at potentially beefing up our whole system in the event that we start to expand generation capacity up in that area. As you know, we're radial, so our generation is mostly focused at San Fernando Road, and then we radiate out. So the Montrose area doesn't have generation, so we would be looking at trying to beef up the whole distribution area to try to minimize any potential outages during say, wildfire events or any type of outages where we can supply energy using multiple paths.
Any other technical?
And that leads me to my next question, which is, how does having 12 megawatts of power, which is a significant amount of power, produced within the city's limits, how does that impact positively or otherwise the resilience of our internal city grid?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I think having generation in that area provides voltage support, and it provides a mechanism for VAR support in that area. Local generation, as you know, is something that's extremely important for us because of our limited transmission capability to the outside world. So losing 100,000 megawatt hours a year is quite drastic. It's 12 megawatts flat, and you know that our peak could be 350. It was at one time 350, and it could go more. So this is a very important asset, and more importantly, you're producing it at night when solar is not being produced, and you're producing it when you really need it in the summer when wind is not being produced in Southern California. There's no wind in Southern California in the summer. So this is a vital asset, and I figure it's a 96 to 98% capacity factor. So it's extremely important for the city and to maintain our distribution grid.
Commissioner Lala, do you have more questions?
I can hold off for now. Thank you very much for those thoughtful responses. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lala. Commissioner Jasmine, do you have questions?
No, all of my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kadikian.
Yes,
Mr. Weber, you indicated that the emission of the green gas is the same whether we do flaring or we install or generate the 12 megawatt. And I assume when you're saying they are the same, you're talking in the Shoal Canyon area. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Essentially, there is the same amount of carbon in the landfill gas, and when that is combusted, regardless of the technology, you are releasing whatever that carbon is in the form of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So that doesn't change based on how or where you combust it.
But we also know at this point that Glendale is not 100% renewable. So we are burning gas at Grayson at some point. So if you were to say the totality of Glendale, when you talk about emissions for the totality of Glendale and not just Shoal Canyon, is it better to just continue to flare and burn gas at Grayson to generate the 12 megawatt? Or is it better to maybe not burn that much gas at Grayson because we can use the Shoal Canyon gas to generate 12 megawatt over there? So the question that I'm asking is, while the emissions are the same in Shoal Canyon area, if you just take it for that area, what would be the emission for the totality of Glendale if we need and we have to and we continue to generate 12 megawatts?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, and I'm certainly not capable of describing the entirety of the city of Glendale's greenhouse gas emissions. I'm just not familiar with all the sources.
Okay. It sounds to me if we need to burn gas at Grayson to generate 12 megawatt, and instead of generating the gas 12 megawatt at Shoal Canyon, we continue to just burn it and generate emission from that, it sounds to me we're doubling the emission for the totality of Glendale for a 12 megawatt.
Commissioner Kadikian, what happens is Glendale uses the renewable energy first and then uses dispatchable energy, which could be Grayson if need be. But we are very committed to making sure that our renewable energy is consumed first. And the peak load is covered by generation as needed. So this would be on the list of do not cut. So this would be replacement energy that at the worst is a default carbon energy, because we would be buying it from the market, and the market has some brown component to it. We wouldn't have to do that in the market with this 12 megawatt flat.
With regards to distribution of the power, whether we distribute it all the way from Grayson to Shoal Canyon or generate at Shoal Canyon and distribute to the Shoal Canyon area, was there any consideration with regards to transmission risks, whether they're fires and transformers and such, in considering the EIR and the risks associated with that?
Well, the proposed project does not include any new transmission or anything like that, so there would be no potential impact related to those facilities as it relates to the proposed project.
Right, okay. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Peterson, questions?
Thank you, Commission President Flanagan. Thanks to the diligence and the thoroughness of all the other commissioners. I have none. It's been very thorough and illuminating to listen.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm glad that we've had all these joint questions, because a lot of issues have come up, and it shows the breadth of issues that are out there. And I'm glad that somebody brought up the solar, and I'm glad that we determined that it's not mutually exclusive whether we have the project or any one of the alternatives. Solar is still I think, very possible, and I think if we look around the country, we'll see more and more solar going up on landfills and figuring out how to put in arrays and dealing with settlement issues. It was interesting, the timing for the new flares that are going in. Are the new flares called the regenerative flares? Am I understanding that correctly? That's a different kind of a flare. So, but what we've learned this evening is that regardless of what happens here, regardless of what decision is made about this biogas renewable project, those flares are going in, right? And I think what we've established also this evening is that in terms of CO2, flaring and using engines up at the landfill or using engines wherever, the CO2 emissions are equivalent, right? So, but I thought I'd also read that in terms of air quality impacts, and I realize that there's really quite terrific disbursement up at the top of Shoal Canyon. It's quite a sight. But in terms of the air quality impacts, is it true that the advanced flares have the least air quality or less air quality impact than the engines that are going in or that are being proposed as part of the project? I think we're probably dealing mostly with nitrous oxides, right?
We have an air quality expert here.
Okay, thank you.
I'd have to take a look at the specs on them. It depends on which pollutant you're. Oh, I apologize. I'm Carl Laney with Montrose Environmental, and we did the air quality analysis and the greenhouse gas analysis for the project. The flares, the newer flares, will have significantly lower emissions than the existing flares. I would have to take a look to see exactly how that pans out relative to the engines, but it depends on the pollutant, actually. For greenhouse gas, again, it makes no difference.
These newer flares are not going to have a lower CO2 emission.
Absolutely not.
No, the CO2 emission stays.
Totally
regardless.
independent of the technology.
So then we're just starting to look at other criteria, air pollutants.
Correct.
And in general, it's fair to say that flaring is perhaps the best way of destroying those pollutants, or the better way than burning them in these engines.
That wouldn't be correct.
That would not be correct.
No, EPA recognizes, and other environmental groups recognize too, the beneficial use of biogas is preferable to simply flaring biogas. The flares, I'm sure, would not have a significant impact, but this project doesn't have a significant impact either.
I think Commissioner Kadikian made a very good point. If you're flaring, then you're losing 12 megawatts that you've got to make up somewhere. Mark, your point about our pecking order, where we're buying our resources, it makes sense. But Commissioner Kadikian's point, I think, is very well put, that there is a double counting.
Correct.
If we flare in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
And that's why the beneficial use is recognized from an environmental perspective.
Right. And it seems as though the gist of the gist of at least my interest in the air quality side is that we've got the flaring, the do nothing, the flares are getting better, cleaner. That seems like, in general, I know we haven't quite clarified that, but in general, flaring is about as good as it gets in terms of dealing with this. This is a renewable resource, but it's probably the worst of all renewable resources, and getting worse over time. But it sounds like flaring is the best that we can do, and in terms of the site, it's the perfect place to either flare or to combust because of the disbursement.
Correct.
Okay.
Historically, flaring has been the way to treat landfill gas, unless there was a beneficial opportunity or an opportunity to beneficially use it for power generation.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the offsets that are planned, because it sounds like since this project was planned, we have greater emissions, greater levels of methane emissions coming out of Shoal Canyon. I think we're up at 136 million BTUs a year, and it's planned for 132. So we have, in any event, we're going to be doing some flaring, right? The engines are, even if they're running at 12 megawatts flat out, we're likely going to be doing some flaring up there as well.
At the front end of the life of the project, yes.
Okay.
And as the project matures and as the landfill matures, and landfill gas production is reduced, then your reliance on flares would be reduced also, and the engines would be more capable of accommodating all the gas.
And we sequentially would take those engines out of service so that we would always be primarily using landfill gas, not natural gas.
Conceivably, you keep them on site to rotate, to
Right.
preserve the asset. Some operators would cannibalize them for parts.
Right. It sounds like if we're below, if our methane content falls below 34%, we've got to augment or supplement with natural gas. And that's the reason we need to build a natural gas line up to that facility if that project is built, right?
That's correct. At some level and at some point, it is conceivable that that would have to happen. Again, our expectation, though, is it would be limited to 10% maximum, and that's the city's commitment, and that's also what we're expecting from South Coast.
Right.
So we
And then is
wouldn't-
that what we would buy offsets? Is that what this private reserve is all about, the Air Quality Management District's private reserve of offsets? Are the offsets purchased to offset the natural gas that's used?
No.
Supplemental natural gas?
The South Coast is obligated through the Clean Air Act to not allow emission increases in the basin for NOx and VOCs, for any non-attainment pollutant. EPA, the state, and most people recognize to turn or close the door to any new projects in a community like Los Angeles is not at all possible. And that's where the emission offsets come from. South Coast recognizes as facilities close down or reduce their emissions in a permanent manner, they track those emission reductions and use those to offset any new project that comes in. Sometimes they allow that to be done through their own accounting system at no charge. Sometimes, like in the private sector, the accounting systems are similar, but in the private sector, they go to the private market to purchase the credits.
So do we expect that the cost of those credits, are we going to be paying for them?
No, the city qualifies. It's called the priority reserve. And the priority reserve is established for certain types of facilities, including what are called essential public service facilities, and that includes landfills. South Coast recognizes that the landfill operator, in this case, the city and or the county sanitation district, has no option but to operate the landfill, and that's why they do not pay for the offsets.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And then I'll just echo something that Chairman Bartrosif said earlier about alternative number 2 and not knowing the costs of the alternative. It was interesting, your comments were well taken that this has not been done at landfills. It's just a concept at this time. I thought I had heard that this had been done at some landfills. Are we quite sure? I think you said not in California. Are there other landfills? Are there new technologies, or are there new companies that are coming along that might do this as sort of a pay-for-performance service?
I think it was Maurice who's answered that question. It looks like he has just stepped outside briefly. I'm going to retrieve him to come back and answer the question.
I will add that Puente Hills has been using landfill gas as a power source in cooperation with Edison. That's been going on for many years. I don't know the current status.
Right. I think that the use of landfill gas as a power source is common. The cleaning up of the natural gas and building a facility to clean it up and to take it from that 34% to whatever, I think you said 92% concentration, and getting rid of a lot of the other pollutants, that's what I'm asking about. I mean, that seems to me that would be the ultimate if we could just flare until that technology were available, but maybe that's a pipe dream. Maurice?
Yeah, sorry, I had to do a little bathroom break. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I was just digging in a little bit more on alternative 2. And what I was saying was that our Chairman Bartrosif, I concur with what he's saying, is that if we don't know the cost of alternative 2, how can we make a reasonable recommendation to our elected officials and our council members? But I heard this evening that this hasn't been done anywhere in California, this cleaning up of the natural gas and getting it ready to be sold.
From a landfill, that's correct.
From a landfill, either sold into the gas distribution system or compressed and turned to CNG for vehicles.
Correct.
And I was just drilling in a little bit. I thought I'd heard that there had been some examples of this, that it had been done somewhere in the country. And it almost seems like it would be something that the private sector would pick up, and some entrepreneur would say, you know, I'll take all that free, rotten natural gas and I'll clean it up and sell it and make money.
Yeah, that gives you an idea how difficult it is. So,
Excuse me. The private sector would want to make money, and there isn't much money to be made by natural gas. It's fairly inexpensive. If you look at wholesale prices of natural gas, what is it today?
About $3 an MMBTU.
And so it just will not pencil out making natural gas. Power is where the money is. You look at your gas bill, you look at your electric bill, see where you are. The private sector would not do this. It doesn't make sense economically. Even though the technology is not there, so people are not working for the technology because it doesn't make economic sense to make natural gas. We could buy it cheaper. You buy it all the time. So it's not something that you would do in the private sector. People have tried it because they have gotten grants from the government to do this. It worked for 6 months. Yeah, it didn't work. It worked. It didn't work. Altamont is a place where they have done this up in San Francisco area, but it shut down. It doesn't work. You need technologies, even though you can remove, for example, the CO2 from the gas. We have 5-8% CO2, which have to remove to almost nothing. Yeah, that takes water, huge amounts of water and high pressure. It's not worth it. So it's not a technology that the private sector would support.
And you think that will be the case for the next 5 or 10 years?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because if we had asked just a few years ago, if we had asked, could you produce steel with no carbon and release no carbon dioxide, everyone would say absolutely not. That's a pipe dream. And now there's a number of companies that are doing just that and about to knock 10% of the carbon
I don't know
footprint.
you're absolutely correct. I don't know what the future will bring. However, this gas is going up in the air and is being wasted today.
Yeah.
That's the issue here. I mean, maybe the technology will come in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Meanwhile, the gas is going up and we're losing energy.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioners, real quick, if I could add to that, as part of the EIR and in Section 5, you will find a table of, I believe it's every landfill in the state of California and how they are handling their landfill gas, whether it's currently in operation or if it's even planned or proposed. There's probably a list of over 100 projects in there. I don't recall seeing a single one that was either in construction, operated, or even planned or proposed doing just what we're talking about right now.
I think it's fair to say this is just a really rotten fuel source. Anyway, that concludes my questions. I will throw it back to the chairman.
I just have some quick follow-up questions. And
Sorry, just want to let the chair know we have 10 callers waiting, so just to give you that information.
Thank you. I'll be very brief.
Excuse me 1 second. Am I also going to be allowed to present? This is Jackie Gish.
Yes, hi, Jackie. You'll be speaking during the public comment period. Thank you.
Okay.
So just very quick, my questions earlier were pertaining to the flaring and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that flaring. In subsequent questions and answers, I've learned that advanced flaring will be happening at the project location regardless of this project. So I'll restate my question and maybe I'll get a different answer. Does the advanced flaring produce less greenhouse gases or the greenhouse gases that we're most concerned about than the project, the proposed project? And was I given a different answer because we were assuming we're talking about the old flares that are not going to be in use in the near future?
The flares, regardless of the existing or updated flares, would not change the greenhouse gas emissions whatsoever. The control technology does not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, it does reduce some other pollutants that are non-greenhouse gases, like the criteria air pollutants that we've talked about. Carl, who was speaking to the group, indicated that there may be a difference on a pollutant by pollutant basis. And not having that data in front of me, but I do recall looking at it, and my recollection was the flares had some increases in some criteria air pollutants, but then also decreases in some others. So there's some pros and cons on a pollutant by pollutant basis.
Okay. And that's not reflected in the EIR, that level of analysis?
The level of analysis in the EIR is evaluating the old flares. So it would be an absolute worst case scenario in terms of the emissions. If and when the new flares are constructed and operated, any of the landfill gas going to the new flares would generally have lower emissions on the criteria air pollutant side than the existing flares.
So
but there would be no change in greenhouse gas emissions.
I'm understanding that very quickly. It is not an if and when, because this is a requirement from AQMD. So we are talking about a scenario in which this is going to happen. Is that correct?
I believe that that's the case. I'm not involved in that project, so I really can't speak to the details on what would potentially jeopardize or cancel it, but that's my understanding as it is going forward.
Yeah, so the sanitation districts are going to install the BACT flare regardless of this project.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So that's important to know and highlights the fact that the information that's being provided through the CIR is not entirely reflective of what we are to expect in the very near future when these new flares are installed. So I want to make sure that that's clear to folks. The other very quick question that I have is this question about investing $40 million in this power plant and what that amount of money could get us with other renewable sources of energy. So has that comparison or analysis been done to determine if we can invest that money in better renewables? And will it get us to that 12 megawatts that this project could produce for us?
So we're very transmission constraint. So as soon as we're getting enough transmission, we buy more renewable assets. And for the record, we've been buying renewable assets for the last 20 years. So actually, Hoover is a renewable asset. It's defined not as a renewable asset, but when we bought it, it was in 1931. So we've been buying assets for a very long time. The problem is transmission, bringing those renewable assets from outside the basin into the basin. We're doing everything that we can to increase our ability to bring or maximize our ability to bring all renewable energy on our existing transmission. By not converting this to energy, we would lose 12 megawatts of capacity. And that 12 megawatts of capacity, with the anticipation of electric vehicles and building electrification, could be extremely important.
And so if I handed you $40 million, would you be able to build transmission lines or other local sources of renewable energy to match the 12 megawatts that, let's say this doesn't move forward, that we would lose?
No.
Can you give me some understanding of how far I'm off with the money that I'm going to give you?
There hasn't been a new transmission line built into the basin in an extremely long time. Riverside did it, and they did a 10-mile transmission line, and it took them over 20 years to get in construction. And that's in Riverside. That's not coming into the metropolitan area. So buying transmission is extremely difficult, if not impossible. We're looking at it all the time. We're finding opportunities here and there, loopholes, in order for us to be able to assume more transmission. But we're not going to be able to buy transmission, especially Glendale itself. We're the donut. We're the whole of the donut, and LA surrounds us totally. So we would have to get through Los Angeles, which is not possible, and to be able to create transmission across a vast miles. I mean, we would have to go to Hoover, or we'd have to go to Palo Verde.
Chairman, if I could just jump in for a second. If you gave me $40 million, I'm in the solar business, I'd give you 20 megawatts of solar right here in the city, if I could drive the cost down to $2 a watt. But that's only giving us generation for about 5 hours a day. These 12 megawatts are generating, 365, 24/7. So there's the big difference.
Right.
We could build renewable solar in the basin, but with that money, but we would come nowhere close to getting the 100,000 megawatt hours that this facility will generate.
Sorry, I sometimes jump the gun. Yes, the capacity factor is extremely important, and with our new project that we're in the final stages of negotiations, we will be putting a lot of solar inside the city.
Okay, thank you very much. So if, shall we move on to public comment? Okay. Jackie, I know that you are, we've lined you up for giving us a presentation. Would you prefer to go first, or would you like us to move forward with other public comments?
I would prefer to go first, and that way the others could adjust to whatever I said or missed.
Okay, Ted, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
If we can, let's go ahead and give Jackie the floor.
Commissioner Bartosuf, do
Yes.
you want to indicate the length of time that would be available to Ms. Gish to make her presentation? And then, depending on the number of callers on the line, perhaps together you'd like to determine how much time you would like to give each of those callers once we have more information about how many people are waiting to speak.
Well, I think we've made a commitment to Jackie Gish and her coalition or association for 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Should we go to 3 minutes for public comment?
Yeah, can you clarify how many callers we have?
So we have 10 callers.
Okay. Is it 10 that are on hold right now?
Correct, 10 that are on hold.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that works for me.
3 minutes. 3 minutes for public comment.
Sure, so we'll go ahead with 3 minutes for phone
Make your
calls.
comments short and sweet and punchy.
And then and we'll go ahead with Jackie first and allow her to give her 20-minute presentation.
Okay, can I go ahead? Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Yes, Jackie.
Okay. All right, first of all, I want to thank you for accommodating us and letting us do this presentation. I'm Jackie Gish. I'm a resident in Glen Oaks Canyon. I'm part of the Glen Oaks Canyon Homeowners Association Landfill Committee, and the Eagle Rock Association has also signed on to this presentation. At the end of this, we were going to ask you to vote not to recommend certification of the FEIR and the project as proposed, and I hope you will see my reasons as I go through the presentation. So we think the fundamental question is, what is the best way to deal with the landfill gas? So as we all know, the methane comes out for decades, and it has to be gotten rid of in some way, shape, or form, either sold back to the gas company or flared or used in engines or whatever. We think the first criteria the criteria for what is the best way, the first one should be safety. And that should be safety for the surrounding communities in terms of fire, air pollution. There's a potential earthquake. There's an earthquake fault 0.3 of a mile from Shoal. Other hazards. The second is utilization of the natural environment. So although it's only 2.2 acres or so, it's 2.2 untouched acres, of which there are very, very few. This whole area is supposed to turn into a recreation area when the landfill closes, and the current estimates are 5 to 6 years from now. So while the project could still be going, this is supposed to be a recreation area around it. And obviously, the utilization of energy and the gas and financials is also a criteria. Just to orient, so this is the project. Can you see my mouse, by the way? In the
Yes,
center?
we see your slides, yes.
And can you see the mouse?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the center rectangle is where the project is. It's about a half mile from Pasadena, a half mile from Eagle Rock, a half mile from Glen Oaks Canyon, and 3/4 of a mile from Chevy Chase Canyon. And this is an eye chart just to say there's a zillion schools, there's a dozen schools or so, there's golf courses, there's parks, all within a 2-mile radius of the landfill. The project design, which was briefly talked about by Stantec, has 4 engines. It's the same as the draft EIR, but it cannot handle the full gas flow. So it assumes flaring of about 20 to 30% of the gas, depending what you assume for maintenance and all of those kinds of things. The nominal design flow is 6,200 standard cubic feet per minute. I've seen numbers a little bit higher than that, some numbers lower than that in the data from the sanitation district. It assumes 36% methane. The last 2 years, the data ranges from 32 to 36. So 36 is basically the highest numbers that I have seen. And the nominal design flow at this 36% is no added natural gas. In the FEIR, it says they will need to add 2 to 3% natural gas when the methane is 34%. And some of the numbers really recently have been 34, 33, 32, 35. So it's unclear that when they're going to add this, how long they're going to add it, when they're going to have to add much more, and how it will change over time. We know that the power will change, the natural gas will end up having to change if they're going to use it. And of course, drought and things like that affect how much methane comes out as well. The alternatives have been discussed at length. I just want to point out a couple of things. So yes, alternative 2 converts it to renewable natural gas. The cost, or what you can sell this renewable natural gas to the gas company, is substantially higher than what you buy regular natural gas for. So there is an economic advantage there. Whether it pays for all the equipment and all of that is a TBD. The equipment is large. It does require power. The methane has to be pressurized and delivered to a gas company pipeline. The DEIR says that pipeline is a half mile from Grayson. So it would use the pipeline from Shoal to Grayson and then clear, clean up the gas. The DEIR asserts that there's no room at Grayson, but there's no layout, so it's not clear whether there is or is not room at Grayson. It's not clear what the best way to use the pipeline is, whether you purify the gas and run it at low pressures down to Grayson, or whether you run landfill gas or just maybe take the siloxanes out or things like that. Alternative 3 is you convert it to liquid natural gas. This is really high pressure. It's a very dangerous tank, and I'm not going to consider this one further because it's extremely hazardous. And I think on the chart you saw earlier, it's not better than anything in very many categories. Alternative 4 is to locate the engines elsewhere. This is basically what was happening before April of 2018 when the boilers were shut down at Grayson due to unhealthy air. This too would use the pipeline from Shoal to Grayson. All right, this is an eye chart. It's basically putting all the information that was presented on the various charts earlier today on one chart. However, I took off some of the criteria, so things like agriculture and cultural and mineral, things like that, that really have no impact on the project or in any of the alternatives. So these are just the ones that, excuse me, are affected by the project. So the project baseline is this column, and LTS stands for less than significant. LTS WM is less than significant with mitigation. The ones in white are the ones where we agree with the less than significant assessment in the DEIR. It really hasn't changed between the DEIR and the FEIR. The ones in yellow are the ones that we disagree with for various and sundry reasons. And I don't have time to go in through all of them today. But let me, for instance, mention the air quality, and I'll have a chart later to show you. The project exceeds the amount of these chemicals such as nitrous oxides and volatile organics over and above the significance level allowed by the AQMD with no way to mitigate that. Also, the project puts out these chemicals locally in the atmosphere right around where the project site is, and I'll show you a chart of that or a picture of that in a minute. So when this is turned into a recreation area, you cannot use some fraction of that because of that. And again, there's no mitigation there at all. The other one I want to mention is wildfire. So the project has engines. Yes, they're in some containers. And it has this above ground gas line, and it has lube oil storage and waste oil storage. These are extremely flammable things, and so we disagree that it is mitigated to a significant amount or enough in order to go ahead with the project. And again, I have some charts on that. The next three columns are alternative 1, 2, and 4. The things that say less, this is the less impact than the project. And if they're in green, it means that we agreed it's less impact and we agreed with the assessment done in the FEIR. If it's red, it's greater or worse, more impact. And I've got to stop touching the mouse. And we agree on, so the red ones are ones we agree that it's worse in that particular category than the project. The yellows are the ones that we don't agree with the assessment. So for instance, on the wildfire, the project has engines and gas lines and oil storage. Alternative 1 does not. So we think that should be less risk, less impact for wildfire. For greenhouse gases, the assumption, the chart in the FEIR says it's greater for alternative 1. So this is something that has been talked about briefly with some of the questions the commissioners have come up with. It's actually the same amount of greenhouse gases pretty much, as long as there's no natural gas added. If there's natural gas added, then the project would have slightly more greenhouse gases. The reason that was put greater than is the assumption that Glendale would use fossil fuels to make up this difference. But Glendale doesn't have to use fossil fuels. It could choose green projects. And so therefore, this one would have basically a similar or white as I've shaded these things. You can see that alternative 1 is mostly green. In fact, if you make the wildfire green, which it should be, except for it doesn't provide the energy, it is better in all categories or comparable in all categories to the project. Alternative 2 is much harder for us to assess because it really depends where this separation equipment occurs. As was mentioned, it's not trivial to separate nitrogen and CO2 and oxygen from methane. The equipment can be large, it takes some power. So it's really not clear how much it affects things, how will it affect the biology? Does it take the same acreage at Shoal? Could it be done at Grayson? Some of these things were rated worse, greater, but they're only during construction, which we think is a bit unfair because during operations, these things are the same. And so it's really hard to assess alternative 2 at this point. We too talked to various people who could do alternative 2. In fact, the Fresh Kills landfill, which is I guess, was one of the largest landfills in the world at one time, has been doing something like Alternative 2, as best as we can tell. We don't know how long they've done it for, but certainly their website talks about it. And it's being done at more and more places. The low amount of methane that we have is an impact to being able to do this. Perhaps some tuning of the landfill could be done to not have quite as much air. That could make this one more attractive. And Alternative 4 is putting the engines down at Grayson. And as was mentioned, Grayson is closer to residents and businesses than Shoal is, so those areas are red. But as far as how much power you'd get, because you don't necessarily have to flare gas, or some percentage of the gas, you could possibly get as much power. You don't know. The analysis was not done, other than saying they would put the same engines down there, but they could choose to put different engines down there. So it's really hard to do a quantitative comparison on all of these things. This is to orient you. Oops, sorry. On the left are the ball fields and the golf courses, which is built on top of the old parts of the landfill. The yellow is the project. The green is the water tank. The blue area right around the yellow is the 100-foot brush clearance. Glen Oaks Canyon is to the left. The gas line is the green line that snakes up from Glen Oaks Canyon. And the main access road comes in from the south. So one thing to notice is there is brush everywhere to the south of this project, to the west of this project. Not so much to the north because that's where the land, but there is a lot of brush around this project. So the whole region is rated as a very high fire hazard zone. The project plans to clear 100 feet. They plan on putting in this water tank. They say the nearest fire stations are Glendale Fire Station, 1.45 miles north, but there's no road that we're aware of from the north. So the closest Glendale fire stations are quite a ways away from this. The closest fire station is to the south, the LA Fire Station. We consider these mitigations inadequate, considering the project is unmanned during operation. In fact, the people running this project are in Brea, California, and Pennsylvania. It adds an above ground natural gas line that I think somebody else might talk about with a comment. It adds lube and waste oil tanks and the engines. This is the air quality that was discussed also briefly, though. So the pollutants are on the left. The first column to the right of that is the total proposed project daily max emissions. The third column is the existing baseline daily landfill gas combustion emissions. I took this from an AQMD site. The FEIR has different numbers that are slightly higher and some slightly lower, and others I don't know where those numbers actually come from. But in all cases, the existing, that's today's flares, not the flares of the future, is better, less emissions from the existing flares than the project in all categories. The one after the red one is the maximum, the daily significance threshold from AQMD. And if you subtract, you see that the increase in emissions is higher than the AQMD threshold in 3 categories. And this was in the FEIR and in the DEIR. They assume that they get priority reserve credits and just wipe those off the books. Well, it's maybe wiped off the books, but it's not wiped off the air. And so these things are still emitting. And the NOx will decline with the new flares. Some of the other things may, but probably not as much. It's primarily aimed at the NOx. This is another chart from the FEIR. They talk about a 100-meter setback zone for air quality safety. We call it a keep-out zone. Basically, inside that odd-shaped thing here, is an area that you should not remain in for very long. So, passing through it on the road might not be a problem, but if you had a soccer field near there, that would be a problem. And so that cuts off a piece of the landfill to be unusable for recreation for at least as long as these engines are running. And we also wonder if, I guess the calculations of this are done under normal meteorological conditions, but there's significant wind that sometimes comes down from there into the canyon. So some of this bad air quality could come down into the canyon. So summary of the alternatives. Alternative 1, continuing to flare. It's likely the safest, likely less risk from fire, air quality, hazards, zero energy, zero cost. So the savings could be spent on putting in more solar in Glendale or in surrounding areas around Glendale, for instance, solar and batteries. The new flares will help the air pollution. Renewable natural gas to the gas company, it was ranked as the most environmentally attractive of the alternatives that gave energy. But there's so much missing from being able to evaluate this, including cost, of course, but size of the equipment, location, the gas mixture, all of that. The third alternative is really unsafe. The fourth alternative is the engines at Grayson. It would utilize the pipeline to Grayson, which is not entirely risk-free. And there's potential unmitigated risks with air quality and noise. It again would need some more analysis to see whether those could be mitigated at all or sufficiently. And finally, last chart. We think the project is not the safest and most environmentally sound way to deal with the landfill gas. It has significant non-mitigated safety and environmental risks, fire, air quality, other hazards. It's worse than the status quo for most environmental factors. So it's worse than it is today for residents and people that might go up to that area when it turns into a park than it is today. We think the EIR is inadequate. The alternatives analysis of the city was forced to do the EIR specifically to provide alternative analysis. We think the analysis is pretty weak and should be done in much more detail. The separation of Shoal and Grayson is artificial. They're connected by the pipeline. They're both part of the renewable portfolio, perhaps. They both provide energy and so forth. Air quality effects on workers and post-closure effects on park users have not been really fully addressed. And really knowing how much power is going to be produced, how much natural gas is going to be used as a function of time is nowhere in the FEIR. So we urge you not to recommend certification of the FEIR and the project as proposed. And we urge you to recommend the pipeline to Grayson not be irreversibly closed. As Chairman Flanagan mentioned, other alternatives may become available and attractive in the future, and that would shut off one way of utilizing those. I didn't discuss it today, but the requirements for a conditional use permit are also not met, and somebody will be calling in, I think, with that.
Okay,
Right
thank you, Jackie. If you don't mind staying with us, we might have follow-up questions later, but I'd like to move on with the other callers because they've been waiting so patiently.
So, Chairman Buttrosoof, just as a point of order, can we ask the commissioners not to use the chat function to post any comments, but to state those publicly, please?
Thank you, David. Okay, thank you, Jackie. Shall we move on to the next caller?
Yes, we actually have now 11 callers.
Okay.
Priscilla Kasha, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Kasha. I'm speaking in opposition to the Shoal Canyon biogas project. We want no hillside power plant in Glendale. I'm an attorney who practices in the area of municipal utility law. My family has lived in Glendale Canyon since 1974. We own 3 houses in the canyon. My sister and I attended all Glendale local public schools. We are heavily invested in the community. When we were young, we always played at Glendale Park, rode our bikes to the canyon, and always felt safe. And we still currently walk the neighborhood regularly for exercise, and we love smelling the fresh air and seeing the neighbors walk the canyon. And as we've been hearing, Glendale Water and Power wants to build a 12-megawatt power plant on the Shoal Canyon landfill. The landfill needs to shut down. It was legally required to be closed in 1987, according to the joint power agreement, but it has stayed open. Glendale sells excess power at the landfill to other cities for a profit, which is unfair to the Shoal Canyon residents who bear environmental burdens. We oppose the project at Shoal that would enable the landfill to continue in perpetuity since it's already long past its original expiration date. The property values will plummet in Glen Oaks Canyon like Porter Ranch. Here, a public service is located in a very close proximity to a huge residential area. But in the case of Shoal Canyon, the project is being proposed in an area that is already completely residential. Methane gas can leak from a garbage dump and cause serious potential hazards and huge liability to the city if something goes terribly wrong. Have we not learned the hard lessons from the largest gas leak in American history at Aliso Canyon? The massive leak caused thousands of local residents to have headaches, nausea, skin rashes, nosebleeds. Over 1,000 residents had to be relocating. There were 1,000 lawsuits plus criminal charges. It cost Southern California Gas Company over $1 billion. And here, that enormous liability would be borne by the city of Glendale and its residents, since the power plant would be owned by the city and not by a private company. These gas facilities should never be put in the middle of a residential area, especially in such a high fire risk zone like Glen Oaks Canyon. With respect to alternatives, Glendale Water and Power picked the proposed project without a detailed study of the alternatives and then backed into making them less attractive than the proposed project. And more details are needed on alternatives that connect the gas to renewable natural gas standards and deliver it to the gas company. And the cleaned up gas could generate electricity at Grayson or be used in fuel cells, which hasn't been talked about. And at least some of the gas cleanup could occur at Grayson. With respect to the renewable portfolio standard, somebody touched upon it earlier. There is absolutely no guarantee that biogas will count as renewable in the future, as the law could change. And this biogas plant could be a stranded asset costing the city millions of dollars. And there are circumstances exactly that happened to other utilities where they made investments counting renewable, and then the law changed, resulting in significant loss to the city. Much more beneficial for the environment for the city to invest in clean wind and solar and energy storage rather than a dirty gas plant. As was stated correctly in this meeting, gas is the dirtiest renewable you could come up with, and no one is building new gas plants in California. Does Glendale really want to be the city that builds a gas plant in the middle of an existing residential area? Wildfire is a huge risk to Glen Oaks Canyon and the surrounding communities. The neighborhoods have very narrow single-access roads, and mitigation of a water tank and apartments miles away is just not sufficient in this day and age with all the wildfires that we're seeing. And recently, many...
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you. You've run out of time. Thank you for calling in. Let's move on to the next caller.
The next caller is Helen Mallory. Helen, you're on the air.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Helen Mallory, and I've lived in Glendale for 25 years. I have environmental concerns about the DEIR. I could go into a great many small, picky details, but I'll step back and look at the big picture. Of the 614 pages of letters commenting on the EIR, 17 pages were a letter from the Los Angeles Board of Sanitation with their list of comments and line-by-line omissions from the report. 42 pages were from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, with many comments about the pertinent material left out of the EIR. Some of the omissions include, where does the water go? Since there are no river areas on the site in question, this was unanswered. But what we need to know is where the water ends up. In the Arroyo Seco or other watershed after a rain, what is the condition and content of the flow, and how will it affect the existing water? The Department of Fish and Wildlife also did not feel that an accurate map of the site was included in the EIR. The majority of the plants and wildlife that are affected by this plan are not taken seriously by the fact that the data regarding them was collected on only 2 days out of the year and none at night. What would actually happen if the EIR was passed? An 18-month project was proposed. 5 months of demolition and dirt moving. This involves moving 20,000 cubic yards of dirt, which by my math is enough dirt to fill up 33 three-bedroom houses. I haven't quite been able to figure out how they're going to do that on just 2 acres of land. That's followed by another 10 months of construction with more big trucks and heavy machinery, and 3 months of finishing up, sandblasting, paint, etc., for firing up the project. Finally, the project would have a brush clearance area of 100 feet around it, but there'd be a 100-meter band, that's length of a football field, of unsafe air around the facility in a no-go zone. How they propose to keep toxic air in that zone, I do not know, as it is not in any documents I have seen. All this in an active wildlife corridor, not to mention the people, also known as sensitive receptors, who live and recreate within breathing distance of this facility. Breathing distance. We are all in breathing distance of that zone. Please vote no. Do not recommend certification for this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next caller.
Our next caller is Justin King. Justin, you're on the air?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. My name is Justin King. I'm a resident of Glen Oaks Canyon, and I'm a member of the Glen Oaks Canyon Homeowners Association. I would like to focus on the danger of the landfill gas line, natural gas pipeline, and the oil tanks associated with the proposed project. The Fire Protection Design Basis Plan identifies a methane gas pipeline explosion and a resulting hydrocarbon fireball as the risk that would have the most severe outcome. A fireball resulting from a pipeline explosion would cause equipment failure within 32 meters, roughly 105 feet, and skin burns to personnel within a 60-meter radius, roughly 197 feet. The heat flux or radiant heat exposure experienced within 32 meters is sufficient to cause spontaneous combustion of wood and pilot ignition of wood. Thus, it is possible that ignition causing a fire could result beyond a 100-foot vegetation clearance. The fire plan itself concludes, I quote, following the fireball, a large hydrocarbon fire would be expected to occur, rupturing the LFG pipe until the gas flow is secured. A methane gas pipeline explosion and resulting fire would likely result in a complete loss of the system at the generating plant, end quote. The Fire Protection Design Basin Plan does not list an explosion at the natural gas line as a potential fire risk. The natural gas line will be above ground, commencing near Lower Shoal Park and terminating at the project site. The route that the natural gas line traverses is through a very steep hillside with dense vegetation. The FEIR states the potential impact radius of an explosion originating from the proposed natural gas pipeline is 9.26 feet. The FEIR does not analyze the risk of wildfire due to an explosion at the natural gas line. A blast radius of 9.26 feet in an area with dry, dense vegetation would almost certainly spark a wildfire that could cause destruction in the neighboring communities. The FEIR also does not discuss the mitigation factors for the project site due to a large wildfire in the area that is not triggered by the project itself. There have been numerous fires in the last couple of years on the hillsides surrounding the project site. In fact, there was a small fire last year at the landfill in the immediate vicinity of the proposed natural gas line. The claim that the project site has lower fire danger because it is an area of little to no vegetation is a little naive considering recent wind fires have blown embers up to a mile in front of the main fire and there is dense vegetation immediately adjacent to the project site. The project will have a natural gas line, LFG line, and lube oil tanks that are potentially explosive and could exacerbate any wildfire in the area. The threat that surrounding wildfires may have on the operational components of the project and whether or not the fuel sources associated with the project could potentially be a safety hazard for firefighters in response to a wildfire on the surrounding hillside have not been analyzed. I urge the Commission to vote no on certification. Thank you for your time.
Our next caller is Robert Hutchins. Robert, you're on the air?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. The reason I'm calling is that I'd like to talk about a topic that several of the commissioners and other people speaking this evening have touched upon, which is that I think it's rather clear that the FEIR is incurably flawed because there's actually no valid justification for having separate EIRs for the biogas project and the Grayson repowering project, because the two projects are inextricably linked. Not only are they inextricably linked, they are literally physically linked. Just by way of background, I've lived in Glendale for 34 years, and I've lived on East Glen Oaks Boulevard in Glen Oaks Canyon for 27 years, since 1994. And the reason that is significant is because it was right around the time that my family moved into the house we live in now that the pipeline connecting the landfill with Grayson was installed. I remember it rather vividly because, as I say, we had just sort of moved in at the time. In any event, as I think the commissioners all know, that pipeline was in use for close to 25 years. Landfill gases were safely transported by way of the pipeline from the landfill to Grayson, and the gas was used there in the production of electricity. Another, as has been referred to this evening, sometime within the past 5 years, I think it was in 2018, GWP shut down the pipeline, ostensibly at least because of air quality readings in the vicinity of Grayson. At the time, and I think this is still true up to the present, GWP did not claim that there was any problem with the pipeline that was the reason for the shutdown. It was only because of the, as I understand it, the air quality readings at Grayson at that time. Pipeline is not only still in place, but there is no evidence that I'm aware of that it does not continue to be as safe and functional as it ever was. And this is what lies at the heart of why the FEIR is fundamentally flawed. There has been continuously since 1994 a physical link between the landfill and Grayson. More importantly, the entire purpose of the pipeline was to address issues that pertain very closely to both the biogas project and the Grayson repowering project, namely how to utilize the landfill gas and how to power Grayson. Now, given that factual history, it is untenable for Glendale to assert, as it does in the FEIR, that the two projects can properly be the subjects of two separate EIRs. As I say, the landfill and Grayson have been inextricably linked since 1994, and the city can't pretend that this history doesn't exist merely because that position suits its current purposes. One last note, which is that I have a copy of a letter that was sent by Glen Oaks Canyon Homeowners Association attorney Amy Mentier to the Sustainability Commission, I believe yesterday. And I would highlight in that letter section 2 with the heading, "The FEIR continues to improperly segment the biogas project from the Grayson repowering project." That's on pages 2 and 3 of our letter. In any event, those are my comments, and I hope that the commissioners find them helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Our next caller is Marie Freeman. Marie, you're on the air. Marie? We're going to go ahead and put her on hold, go to the next caller. Our next caller is Owen Lewis. Owen, you're on the air.
Hello, yes. My name is Owen Lewis. I live in Glen Oaks Canyon. I find some flaws with this EIR. I agree with the segmenting problem, but more specifically, I have to disagree with the way the EIR dismisses microturbines. They claim that there is no comparable landfill application in California. However, a simple search turns up the Calabasas landfill, which produces over 7 megawatts from about 6,000 cubic feet per minute, with only 25% of methane in the landfill gas. Now that is engineered by a Long Beach company, and it's turbines provided by a California company. Microturbines are a proven technology with a 20-year service life, which is standard. Again, the market leader is a California company. The EIR claims that it would take too much room. It would take a little more room. A 1 megawatt unit is about 3 meters by 9 meters in size, which is about half the size of one of the generator sets that's being proposed. So it would take about equivalent to about 6 of the generator sets that they proposed. These are the different engines for alternate 4 that were mentioned. They could be placed at Grayson. They're cleaner operating. They operate at a high temperature. They have excellent emissions. They're about the same as flaring, as a matter of fact. And in terms of maintenance, the EIR does not mention any of the significant environmental impact of the thousands of gallons of oil and the filters and the thousands of gallons of coolant that have to be replaced and disposed of during operation. Microturbines don't require that. They just require air filter replacement. At Grayson, which would be the best site to use, they'd have to do less site prep. At Grayson, you can exploit the combined cooling, heating, and power technology available through microturbines, effectively doubling the output. You could use this technology to improve the efficiency of a large gas turbine, which improves the turbine's emissions, which is a win-win for everyone. So I urge you to not approve this EIR and devote some more study to the use of a viable alternative technology deployed at Grayson in microturbines. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for calling. Next caller.
Our next caller, we're going to go back to Marie Freeman. Marie, you're on the air.
Thank you. Commissioner, staff, my name is Marie Freeman, and I'm a board member also of Glen Oaks Canyon Homeowners Association. I'd like to speak just briefly to the land use issues. Although these commissions are not voting on a conditional use permit, the Planning Commission will, and it could have a detrimental long-range effect on land use in the Verdugo and Rancho San Rafael Hills. For at least the last 46 years, the intent of the land use element of the Glendale General Plan has been to protect and maintain the natural environment of the hills. And I could quote chapter and verse from the Glendale plan, but I'll spare you that. The area is currently zoned special recreation, and the land use designation is recreation and open space. The bird's eye view you've seen this evening of that area, though, illustrates something very different, not recreation or residential, although all the surrounding areas are densely populated and contain significant recreational parcels. The landfill was permitted as a result of a variance in 1978. The permit, however, came with a condition. Energy recovery activity was not permitted. The proposed project is an energy recovery activity. Therefore, the conditional use permit is required. But 3 primary conditions must exist for a CUP to be granted, and we believe that they are not. First of all, the project must be consistent with the elements of the plan. A biogas power plant with power transmission to SoCal Edison, not consistent with open space or recreation. The proposed change must not be detrimental to public health, safety, or the environment. Again, previous speakers have shown that aspects of the project do apparently present risks to health, safety, and the environment. And then the third item, the project must not adversely affect or conflict with adjacent uses or impede normal development. We could talk on, there's a lot of detail in that, but basically the surrounding development is residential, recreational, not industrial. There are no industrial areas in there except those that are being created. Look at what the 1978 variance has done to stray away from the general plan's intent. Just because zoning maps say this part of Glendale is open space and recreation, the reality of a 525-acre dump says something very different. Our fear is that a CUP for a power plant could be an opening to even greater industrialization of the remaining hills. And some of the discussion even this evening among the commissioners and staff apparently seems to assume there may be some. And there may be. But we do have to be very careful with these decisions because they have implications for the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marie. Let's move on to the next caller.
Our next caller is Nina Chomsky. Nina, you're on the air?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Nina Chomsky, and I'm president of the Linda Vista Annandale Association, LVAA, and we are your neighbors in Pasadena, generally to the east of the project site. And our area consists of approximately 1,350 homes, many of which are directly impacted by the proposed project, and we are sensitive receptors, including the Art Center College of Design Hillside campus. And our area descends in a terraced manner down to the central arroyo. I have a procedural comment to make first, and that is that your agenda seems to have an error in it. It says that you're recommending to the council both commissions, and you are not. You are apparently recommending to the Planning Commission. This is misleading to the public because the Planning Commission is meeting right away, and that's where the decision will be made on the certification of the EIR. And I'm also wondering whether you should make your decisions the other way. You should decide on the recommending on the FEIR before you decide to recommend on the project, because environmental clearance is always first. But now back to the matter at hand. Originally, we were very concerned about air quality when we had to consider this air quality from this project with the Hahamungna sediment removal project, but that has ended early. So air quality is still a main issue, and we adopt the position of Amy Mintier in her gotcha legal letter, and also our friends at in the Glen Oaks Canyon, our neighbor friends. We support their position on that for the moment. Our primary concern now is wildfire. So let me provide information about our neighborhood that was not mentioned in the EIR. We are in the highest of fire danger areas. Pasadena has a new excellent fire chief who just toured our area and was, I would say, shocked. According to him, we are in a neighborhood that is ripe for an Oakland Hills type fire. Once the fire starts, it is going to destroy us in a matter of a very short time. It will engulf us and overwhelm our narrow hillside streets and many hillside homes. And we need our own new fire protection plan just for us. And the city has just pledged several $1 million to upgrade our fire station on Linda Vista Avenue to rise to the occasion of these risks. The FEIR is dangerously inadequate on this subject. We adopt Ms. Mendier's comments on the subject in her letter, again, but also we note the following. The fire mitigation measures address construction. They don't address operations, which were mentioned earlier, including, and they don't address evacuation plans, even mentioned by the County Public Works Department in the letter. The fire mitigation measures must be expanded and detailed to cover emergency evacuation and related conditions from a massive Oakland-type fire, including dealing with an enormous number of people from our area who are going to crunch along on your streets and clog them immeasurably. And don't forget the nearly 100,000 people that will possibly be in the Rose Bowl when the Olympics come, and we have 5 or 6 days of soccer in the Rose Bowl, and we have a fire, and they all will go on the freeway, go on all the streets, and we will all be trapped.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
Our next caller is Han Johnson. Han, you're on the air.
Hello, commissioners, and hello, other residents of Glendale. I want to thank all commissioners and all who have taken the time to stay on the line to provide public comment. As president of the East Area Progressive Democrats, I in particular want to thank the fellow members of the club who have taken the time to express their principled and informed concerns and objections to proceeding with the ill-advised effort to build a gas plant at the known burn area atop the trash pile at Shoal Canyon Dump. This environmental hotspot has been operating for 60 years, located in Glendale, but accessed solely through Los Angeles. An injustice of its own that I appreciate the honesty of commissioners in dealing with the fact that it would continue in any construction of an ill-advised gas plant atop the existing dump. I want to make note of the letter that we have provided to commissioners and add it to the record of opposition to this proposal from the chair of the County Board of Supervisors and 1st District Supervisor, Hilda Solis. Her opposition is rooted in a number of factors as articulated in the letter. These include the fact that the wildfire danger from the construction of an unnecessary and unproven power plant atop the dump would be in a demonstrated danger zone for wildfire. This is not a putative or speculative danger. It is one that we have observed repeatedly over the last decade, including the catastrophic incident in August of 2019 when both freeways were closed. Even in the last week, we have fire pictures from surrounding residents and the need for emergency vehicles to respond to incidents of fire outbreaks. To locate atop the dump and to build an unnecessary new pipeline would add to the dangers to surrounding residents, and it would add to the cost of this unnecessary biogas plant. We want to call attention particularly to the evidence that the existing pipeline to the Grayson location is functional, and to on-the-record comments with council members and by the former director of the Water and Power Division in Glendale that that pipeline is operative. We remain deeply concerned about the effort to construct a new pipeline and at the effort to prolong the lifespan of the dump. This has been operating for 60 years. It continues to treat the lives and the health of surrounding residents as expendable, which was all the more aggravated by the dangers of COVID, given the respiratory risk that the pollutants from the dump put surrounding residents at. We urge you to stop the folly of proceeding with this scheme and to consider the many alternatives that need to be fleshed out further to this effort to build the gas plant. We urge you to consider, in particular, efforts to initiate and to build the necessary capacity at Grayson, and on behalf of the more than 1,000 members of our club who have voted repeatedly to oppose this scheme and to stop the effort to build the gas plant, we urge you to take these under considered advisement. Thank you again for your time, and thank you for taking the many comments of opposition to heart.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you. Next caller.
Our next caller is Michael McDonough. Michael, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Michael McDonald, and I'm calling in as a nearby resident in Eagle Rock and on behalf of the Eagle Rock Association, also known as TERRA. As Jackie Gage mentioned earlier, TERRA stands with our Glen Oaks Canyon neighbors in opposition to the proposed Shoal Canyon biogas power plant project, and we commend her on her presentation. We urge the commissioners of each commission to recommend no certification of the FEIR and proposed project, and for the city to move forward with the otherwise planned phase out of the Shoal Canyon dump and conversion to recreation area. This new power plant project would have significant impacts in noise, air quality, traffic, construction, and fire danger to nearby residential communities of Glen Oaks Canyon, Chevy Chase Canyon, Eagle Rock, Pasadena, and La Cañada Glen Ridge. Right now, Angeles National Forest is completely closed to recreational uses because of the risk of wildfires and the strain that is already placed on our regional firefighting resources due to the increasing severity of our wildfire season. It is incredibly problematic to introduce new and long-term ignition and fuel sources to a very high fire severity zone in direct proximity to residential communities. This proposed project is a step in the wrong direction and would negatively impact the conversion of the Shoal Canyon dump to recreation areas. The impacts of a new power plant at this location are not, and in most cases cannot, be mitigated if the proposed project moves forward. Terra urges the City of Glendale to abandon this power plant project and to refocus funds on environmentally friendly energy sources for its energy needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next caller.
Our next caller is Kate Unger. Kate, you're on the air.
Yes, hello, thank you. All the commissioners, all the staff, thank you all very much. I will try to keep this short. I just have a few thoughts. One is, I have been frustrated all along that the number one project objective was defined as beneficial use. I understand that the landfill gas is a problem we have to deal with, but I think if the city had asked the community what they thought the primary objective would be, they might have come up with a different suggestion, such as, say, minimizing health impacts to our community. And this idea of the beneficial use just worries me because I think it distorts things. We have the option of flares. I think that they are definitely better, even the existing flares, in terms of air quality. So yes, greenhouse gas emissions are the same, according to the EIR, greater because some other dirty energy would have to be used in place. But even with that, the EIR finds less air quality impact. So clearly it's less, even considering other energy. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean dirty energy to replace the energy that would otherwise be burned at Shoal. And it certainly doesn't mean 12 megawatts of energy would be produced at Grayson. In fact, the Grayson project is a peaker plant, and what's supposed to happen at Shoal is base load. If you put all of that over at Grayson, this is I should clarify, I'm a Pelincone Estate resident, so I'm so close to that power plant at Grayson. I'm a few blocks away. I hear the operation. I see it out my front door. So I'm very close, and I'm not the only one in this neighborhood. I have residents around me who are raising families here. We're heavily burdened. We don't want to see more air quality impact over in this area. And a last thought is, I understand that the landfill gas is RPS eligible energy from it as a matter of state law, but of course it's not zero carbon. It does emit greenhouse gases and other pollutants that have health impacts. It's not equivalent to other renewable energy. Of course, we don't want to renew it. And as another caller has mentioned, state law could change. It seems like a bad idea to make a large long-term investment in polluting technology on the basis that it's renewable energy. The flares are safer for now. Technology will improve. Maybe it's best to just go with the flares for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Next caller.
Our next caller is Audrey Sorokian. Audrey, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Audrey Sorokian, and I'm a Glenoaks Canyon Homeowners Association board member, as well as the Coalition for Shoal Landfill Alternatives president. And I live in Glenoaks Canyon, and I oppose the EIR for the power plant, and hope you do as well. I have a few comments. Once the landfill closes, the methane which it naturally produces will gradually decline. And then what? Well, the EIR says the city will just increase the amount of natural gas pumped to the proposed power plant in order to continue to generate electricity. 4 40-feet-tall exhaust stacks and 1 flare, a 60,000-gallon water tank, and equipment with a height of 25 feet are proposed to be built at the landfill site. The EIR says the project site will be industrial in appearance. These unsightly industrial equipment will be up on a hill on 2.2 acres of land and will no doubt affect the aesthetics of the surrounding neighborhoods and our beautiful hillside, something we did not sign up for when we purchased our home. The proposed power plant will increase the level of pollution. It'll release toxins and carcinogens into the air we breathe. According to page 25 of the current EIR, without paper credit, NOx, CO2, and VOC emissions of the proposed project will exceed the significance threshold. Earlier, the Stantec Oh, actually, let me speak about the sensitive receptors within a 2-mile radius of Shoal landfill. There are 11 schools, 1 major hospital, daycare facilities, elderly care facilities, the Rose Bowl, Kids Space Museum, residential areas, and the list goes on. The Stantec rep said earlier that alternative number 2 and 4 are similar in certain areas, such as noise, but he seemed to dismiss alternative number 4 because he said that for alternative number 4, noise would be closer to sensitive receptors near Grayson. Well, homes near Grayson are not in a quiet area. They are near busy roads and freeways, near an industrial zone with warehouses, automotive shops, a hazardous waste disposal facility, a water treatment plant, several car washes, a chemical treatment, a chemical dyeing facility, and much more. So while the noise output for alternative 2 and alternative 4 might be the same, the area in which that noise output would be are drastically different. Glendale neighborhoods in close proximity to Shoal landfill are in a quiet and serene area surrounded by hills. They are in a canyon, such as Chase Canyon and Glen Oaks Canyon, where noise levels are amplified due to sound echoing off of canyon walls. I don't think Stantec is taking this into consideration. In Glen Oaks Canyon, after 8 p.m., I swear you can almost hear a pin drop. In fact, some of my neighbors have said that they can hear the flares currently in use during evening hours at some point. So the Stantec rep also said that alternative number 1 was evaluated under worst possible conditions with old flares. Is it safe to say then that the same can be assumed with the evaluation of alternative number 4, that it too was evaluated using old equipment under worst possible conditions? If alternative number 4 was implemented, are there state-of-the-art equipment with emissions controls and filters that can be used to process the methane at Grayson? And another question is, how many megawatts of electricity does Glendale need to power the city on a given day or in a given year? And isn't
Thank you, Audrey.
true that, okay, thank you.
Thank you
Have
so
a
much.
good night, everyone. Thank you.
Next caller.
Our next caller is Walt Kasha. Walt, you're on the air.
Oh, my name is Walt Kasha, and I've been a Glen Oaks Canyon resident for 10 years, and I oppose the Shoal Canyon biogas project and the IR. Recently, many Glen Oaks Canyon residents, including my father-in-law and my sister, received fire insurance cancellation notice because of the extreme fire risks that already exist due to climate change and other factors. Putting a power plant on the hillside will make matters dramatically worse and create a catastrophic risk to property. Further, we have an earthquake risk that really needs to be addressed. The project will be located at the top of a mountain that sits near a 6.7 earthquake fault, which is a major concern in California. And in terms of the project itself, how will this project look when the landfill closes? How will the project impact the intended future recreation use of the site? Please don't approve a project with unknown impacts. In terms of utilities and service systems, why is the natural gas not underground? How will this megawatt facility interconnect to the electrical grid? This is a major missing piece, and needs to be discussed in detail in the IA. In terms of land use and planning, the project requires a continual use permit, which would open the door to further industrialization in a completely residential area, as earlier speakers have said. As far as transportation, the report underestimates the project's impact on transportation by not including increased traffic during construction, not by addressing the boulevard, especially near Figueroa. Water quality, more groundwater monitoring needs to be done to assure no release and migration of hazardous materials. And this project reminds me of a stop oil initiative in a residential area of Hermosa Beach, where the city was threatened with litigation and bankruptcy. The residents ended up defeating the project, 80% opposed to the project ballot box after a long legal battle. The EIR missed the impacts of transportation, air quality, pipelines built, but the city's arguments didn't hold up. City lost and the city fine with the project. In conclusion, we request that the landfill be closed as soon as possible, and in the meantime, that it be used only for specifically Glen Oaks Canyon residents. By doing this, the city will delay having to look for an alternate site for Glendale's own trash disposal needs at unknown future. We want to put this off for future generations and avoid being in the same position we are now. Please stop letting us use the site for monetization. The environment will take precedence over any amount of money. There are over 2,000 residents in the canyon, and we all currently enjoy the physical beauty of the surrounding environment. Glen Oaks Canyon is truly a special place. We really don't want to. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Next caller.
Our next caller is Amy Koss. Amy, you're on the air. Amy? We're going to put her on hold. Go to the next caller. The next caller is David Eisenberg. David, you're on the air.
Good evening, commissioners from both commissions. It's nice to have this only in one session, so I don't have to call in twice. I never in my life thought I would ever make a phone call that was even remotely in favor of a power plant construction, but I have some concerns about the alternatives as, in some ways they're worse. I'd like to talk about the flares. Right now, if that gas was converted to power, it's 12 megawatts. And right now it's being burned. So think of a giant gas stove that's heating up the air with 12 megawatts worth of energy constantly, because those flares are burning constantly. That's a lot of heat. It's enough heat that the Shoal Canyon is visible from outer space in satellite images with IR photography. It is as much heat as shows when we had the wildfires in the Angeles forest. I was actually searching for those, and I found Shoal Canyon was producing the same heat signature. It's the same heat signature that's being produced by the refineries down in San Pedro. That's a lot of heat, and that heat is coming into the local neighborhoods. And maybe if it was used to provide energy, maybe the GWP people could tell us would that much heat be produced, or would it be distributed as energy? I'm also concerned about the double pollution. If we flare the things, you have the carbon load. But if you don't generate the 12 megawatts of power, then you have to generate the 12 megawatts somewhere else. And if it's gas, which is most likely Grayson with the gas unit number 9, that's double the carbon load. So I'm also concerned with all the comments, which is what prompted me to call in, is that all of the callers are saying, oh, yes, it's fine to have this generator over at Grayson. It's just not okay to have it at Shoal. And I find that kind of a double standard and maybe a NIMBY issue, because, if it's not a good idea to burn the fuel in a generator, then it shouldn't be okay at Grayson either. And yet it seems to be, let's ship it to Grayson. We'll treat it at Grayson. We'll do this at Grayson. And Grayson's impacted enough. And then there were some comments about building the natural gas pipelines and the pipelines that are above ground. And I've been to the outskirts of that landfill, and there are the landfill gas pipelines cover that hillside. Every terrace has a pipeline. There's like 3-foot diameter pipelines along the top. They're talking about a 3-inch pipeline, not a 3-foot pipeline coming up that hill that already has existing pipelines. So I just wanted to comment on those things. I'm not going to say build the power plant or don't build the power plant, but I'd like to think about to have people look at the heat that's being produced, and is there a better alternative? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next caller.
Our next caller, we're going to try Amy Koss again. Amy, you're on the air. Amy? That is our last call.
Okay. Thank you to the callers, and thank you, Jackie, for the presentation. We appreciate everybody's feedback on this issue. Would staff want to make any follow-up comments, or should we move on to, yeah?
Thank you, Commission Chair and President. I just wanted to indicate that this is an advisory opinion or advisory motion. And as the commissions know, motions can be modified, additional information can be added, comments can be included. So what I would recommend in that regard, and I agree with the speaker in terms of the process, is that the motion is a recommendation to the City Council and any other advisory boards. That would include the Planning Commission. Yeah.
Thank you for
You're welcome. That would
making
be for both motions. Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that for us. Okay, I think, so it seems that the Sustainability Commission would make a recommendation first, just based on how the agenda's laid out, and then we can pass it on to the Glendale Water and Power Commission.
Yes, I'd like to make a recommendation.
Yes, Rondi, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. A little lengthy, so bear with me. I just added more after hearing the last speaker, but I move that the Sustainability Commission, having heard staff presentations, reviewed materials, considered public comments, and having deliberated and discussed the available data, should direct staff to provide the following recommendations to City Council and the Planning Commission concerning the certification of the final EIR and the proposed project. Essentially, to not certify the EIR and to reject the project as proposed for the reasons that include the following. Number one, the data on the no project alternative is out of date since the existing flares are being replaced with advanced flaring with lesser but as yet unknown pollutant levels. Two, it would violate the Glendale Municipal Code by failing to protect primary ridge lines. The EIR asserts that the proposed project would be new and independent when it wants to be separate from Grayson, but claims to be an existing utility when seeking exemption from aesthetic impacts on a primary ridge line. They can't have it both ways. The proposal is a new project with new equipment and an independent utility. The facts don't support that it's an existing project. Three, the economic benefits stated as the purpose of the project are speculative and will decline from year to year. It appears that the break-even point could occur at about the time the project is decommissioned. Staff should study this in more detail and provide a report since CEQA does not address the financials. Mr. Eisenberg, who just spoke, raised an interesting point about the heat signature. Staff should do a report looking at the average temperatures in the city before and after the flaring system was installed. I know as a resident of Glendale for over 30 years that the temperatures have gone up dramatically. Maybe that has something to do with it. We should know that in order to make it an informed decision. As other fellow commissioners and members of the public mentioned, we need a holistic approach that considers the totality of our emissions and considers Shoal Canyon landfill gas as a local resource that could be utilized at Grayson using the best available control technology, and incorporates this strategy into the Grayson repowering plan. Segmentation of Glendale's power resource plan does not serve the public interest of powering the city in the least impactful and most economic way possible. The Planning Commission and Council should reject the assertion that the biogas project and Grayson are separate because they serve different purposes. The facts suggest that they both could achieve the same purposes. They're physically connected, and both must be considered part of the state mandated renewable portfolio standard. Number 8, I skipped some of the numbering, sorry. The highest form of environmental stewardship is the reuse of existing resources. So every effort should be made to ensure that Glendale's energy plan integrates existing infrastructure as much as possible, including the fuel from Grayson, and the biogas project does not achieve this. In conclusion, an integrated resource plan must be developed through an integrative process and without segmentation, where everyone works together to achieve regulatory requirements, impact avoidance, power reliability, and cost effectiveness. And I welcome any other comments that people would like to add to that.
I would second that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay,
can
I
hear
would
you.
second that with a couple additional comments. I'm sorry, Jennifer Pinkerton. This is not part of an EIR, DEIR rather, but I think we need a better understanding of what the city's going to do in terms of zero waste in compliance with SB 1383, because we have to dramatically reduce the amount of organic materials going into our landfill in order to cut methane generation by the landfill. So I think we need discussion on that as an ancillary program. I was disappointed that microturbines were not considered. Those are in use other places. I would like that option to be revisited. And then the third comment is the construction of this power plant, if this were to be approved, and I'm not saying it should, but the city would have to put out an RFP or an RFQ, and that would take some time. So construction conceivably would not start until 2023, possibly. If it's 18 months, that gets us to 2025, which is conceivably when the landfill is supposed to close. So to me, it makes more sense to start looking at installation of solar PV arrays at the landfill, given the PV could conceivably go up the same time that the landfill would be closing and the power plant would be operational. Thank you.
Okay, could you repeat the part about the impacts of SB? Which one was that?
Oh, yes, certainly. The SB 1383 demands, requires diversion of organic material from landfills. And no one that I don't know of any municipality that's in compliance with this right now. I'm not aware of what the city's franchise program for trash haulers will get us toward SB 1383 compliance, but we need some more specifics about how much organic material is going to be diverted from our landfills and by when, because the organic material is what is generating the methane at the landfills. So I think I need a better understanding, better handle on what the city plans to do with that. What are we doing with food waste diversion, with food rescue? Where are we sending our green waste materials, things of that sort, because green waste was still going into Shoal Canyon. So I need a better understanding on how zero waste in the 1383 implementation plan will impact all of this. Hopefully that's clear. Thank you.
So let me repeat it back. So number 10, we need a better indication of the impacts on Shoal of SB 1383 requiring diversion of organic materials from landfills. And 11, microturbines should be revisited, and they are in use in other cities. And 12, you would like a study of a solar option. What was
right,
it?
at the landfill, right.
Yeah, at the landfill,
Right, yeah. Because I think the power plant would probably not be operational until around when the landfill's closing, and that is when solar PV is feasible after the landfill's closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jillian, can you clarify for us exactly what this motion would be? I'm not asking you to repeat what Rondi and Jennifer just said, but would we technically be voting on everything that was just stated?
Shall I share my screen?
Well, I'm not sure I've captured everything. I think things got a little murky around item 7, so my numbering got off. But since
that's on me.
Okay, well, I'm not necessarily going to repeat all the numbers right at the moment, but these are recommendations, and so these would be captured in the motion ultimately, whether I'm able to do that right now or go back and listen to the tape and incorporate in all those items, if that's the Sustainability Commission's desire, to include all of these as recommendations to go along with the recommendation not to certify the project or approve. So that can be done.
Isn't that the primary recommendation, is not to approve the FEIR? And
yes.
Then all these other points, these are the reasons for that.
Right. So it was just stating the first part that probably got, lost in the shuffle there, but was that to not certify the EIR and to reject the project as proposed?
That was
for
clear,
reasons that
yes.
include the following, and then it was followed by the list.
Okay, so you've made a technical motion, and I think the genesis of that motion has been seconded by Jennifer, and then the additional comments
Would be
follow
included.
that would be noted and shared with staff and the other commissions and council. So let's just move forward with that simple assertion that there's a motion on the floor to not certify the EIR. And since there is a second, we can now deliberate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I just, I'm pulling up the New York Times right now, and I don't want to come off as being dramatic, but 43 dead as deadliest storm since Sandy devastates the Northeast. And we are in the year 2021, considering the proposal to build a new power plant that is burning gas. So from the outset, I'm extremely uncomfortable with that, and to make a decision or recommendation today to ask council to spend $40 million on that type of infrastructure just does not sit with me comfortably. And I know we're talking about an EIR process, and to me, as has been stated by other commissioners and by the public, that information is either not fully vetted, or the proposals are not fully vetted, are not fully explained, and frankly, in some cases, is outdated. Namely, the issue with the existing flaring equipment versus new flaring equipment. My main intent is to ensure that we are reducing, to the extent possible, greenhouse gas emissions from the operations that the city is partaking in. And we can parse out which type of greenhouse gas emissions. I guess smog is the most important or critical for our local population and our environment. And so that's what I am focusing on, and the thrust of the unease that I have as part of the desire to certify this EIR. I think in addition to that, there were assumptions made about double counting, and if we're not producing these 12 megawatts, we are somehow producing 12 megawatts using dirty fuel. That is another assumption that doesn't sit well with me, and is an assumption that's being made. And to learn and understand that this power plant is going to go beyond 2030, 2040, we're really, by making an investment like this, we are cementing our reliance on fossil fuels. And that doesn't sit well with me either. I feel like we are now on a trend to move towards renewables. We want to not produce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to have a cleaner environment and safer neighborhoods for our city. And I'm not sure that this particular proposal is doing that to the best of its ability. And so when I hear language like, we're preserving our assets, we're doing things like that, that doesn't jive with the policy priorities that I'm hearing from the existing council, and quite frankly, the needs of the community and what the community is asking for. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge the hard work that you've all done. This is not an easy task. I know the amount of work that's involved in generating EIRs and analyzing all the alternatives. I just don't think that this is the proper approach for our city. So I'd like to leave it with that, with my comments, and when it comes time to it, I'll support this motion. Any other comments from the Sustainability Commission? If not, let's move ahead with the motion on the floor and do a roll call.
Commissioner Kartunian?
No.
Commissioner Kanjian?
Yes, as stated.
Sorry, that was a yes on the motion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Commissioner Pickerton?
Yes on the motion.
Vice Chair Werner?
Yes.
Chair Bartosov?
Yes. All right. Thank you to the commission. Again, thank you to staff, and I'll pass this on to Ted.
Thank you very much. This is an interesting exercise, isn't it, having a joint commission? What we'll do is the same thing as we did before. We'll go through our sustainability, our Glendale Water and Power Commissioners' comments, starting with Commissioner Law. Starting with Commissioner Law.
Thank you, President Flanagan. I guess I have real reservations about some of the conversation regarding this project and its connection to Grayson. And the idea that if we do not produce electricity at this location, that we can just produce it at Grayson, and that somehow that has lower impacts. I mean, it has lower impacts for the people who live next to the biogas, the proposed project. But I would argue that the people who live near Grayson are already disproportionately impacted by emissions from adjacent, being adjacent to two major freeways, a rail line, multiple industrial uses, and the existing gas plant. So I don't see sort of shifting the need for production of this 12 megawatts from one location to another location. I don't really see that as being a positive thing for the overall community. But I'm still considering my position, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the other commissioners have to say.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Law. Commissioner Jasmine, comments regarding this recommendation to certify or not to recommend to certify?
I'm still thinking about it, but as Commissioner Law said, there are impacts to Grayson by moving down this generation down to Grayson. But also, the methane gas is already there, whether it's by flare or by using this generation. You've still got the same air quality issues going on. So that's another concern. The other concern is, as staff said, as the area settles, you're not going to be able to put anything like photovoltaics, anything like that in there until actually you've got some settlement so that there's no further damage to the equipment. So this is a tough one to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kadikian.
Hello. First, I'd like to thank staff for the amount of time, effort, and information they provided with the final EIR. I appreciate all the considerations they took and have to take during this process. I appreciate all the mitigation that they have considered and provided for. It's a difficult decision, no doubt about it. But what concerns me is, one, the shifting of the generation or the gas over to Grayson, which Grayson, as Commissioner Law indicated, area is pretty much impacted. And the second thing, which is of large consideration for me, is the beneficial use of this gas. It's there, it's going to burn one way or another. And getting some benefit out of it would help us on the long run, help us all of Glendale on the long run, reduce our dependence on gas that we have to pull out of the ground, bring it all the way to Grayson and burn it there when the gas is being already generated by itself at Shaw Canyon, and we could just burn it and get some beneficial use out of it. I wouldn't have argued this if we are generating the gas ourselves, but the gas is there. It's going to burn one way or another. So I am in favor of having a beneficial use for it, and I think it will help us go more in the direction of sustainable, reliable energy. I just don't see why, when there is a gas sitting and it's just burning, we should go ahead and import gas from wherever we have to and burn it again at Shoal Canyon. Now, I know some people said that's an assumption. That is not an assumption. We burn gas in Grayson. We buy gas energy or similar from outside. Glendale, by no means, is 100% renewable at this time. We have an objective of getting there, but we're not there, and we are far from being there. This is our way to go in the direction of renewables. This gas is there, it's being burned, and it's renewable. So instead of seeing this, for the people of Shaw Canyon, as a problem in their backyard, I hope they see it as a solution that they can contribute to the problem of all Glendale, all of the United States, and all of the planet Earth. So with that, I am for certifying the final EIR and also for the approval of the project. If somebody needs a motion, I'll make that motion, but if others want to talk first before we start making motions, I can wait.
Let's thank you, Commissioner Kadikian. Let's finish with the commissioner comments, and then we can make motions. Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, President Flanagan. I echo my fellow commissioners' comment that this is a difficult decision as to how we best recommend what is the greatest good for the greatest number. It does seem important to consider that we do have the gas that is being generated, the methane is being generated and is being burned. It wasn't really addressed, and maybe I should have brought this up as a question. I don't quite understand exactly what the risk and danger level is with the current flare system and the proposed new system that is going on, that when you are combusting a combustible methane gas like this, not only are you creating heat, but systems can fail. I think one of the very valid points that was brought up by the public comments in the presentation there was that the proposed generation system would have potential risks of the system because it is remotely managed and monitored. But I don't know that we are manually monitoring and operating the flare system. And if we have a failure of the flare system, is that not itself already a fire risk and a risk to the community? And I'm not sure that the new system would have a greater risk, the generation system, relative to what already exists. So the real question comes down to is, are we materially changing the risk to the communities, to the people, to the safety, and then to the natural environment with the generation system, where clearly the one thing that is admitted and is not in dispute is that the generation system does contribute to power generation, a benefit to the community as a whole. It can be debated whether there are other alternatives, but we have not been able to talk about any particular alternative. And the micro turbines is an interesting one. I don't understand if that would have as much the same efficacy and why staff had not brought it forward and consider it. I assume that their expertise has been applied to this for several years. And I think we need to rely to some extent and give a benefit of the faith and fidelity as public servants that they bring to their jobs and the expertise that they bring as experts who have been in their professions for a very long time. So with all that said, it's a difficult decision, and I am not prepared to immediately reject the EIR, nor to immediately consider recommending against the proposal, but I am open to hear any more thoughts or facts that may be beneficial one way or the other to determine.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson, and very interesting that we have 3 commissioners that are still unclear, and I'll just say, I'll add myself to that. And you know, part of my perspective is I've been working in the electric utility industry since 1984, and I think one thing is very clear, that there are trade-offs. There are pros and cons of even solar power, even renewable power, and different kinds of, all different types of generation have different trade-offs. And I've been thinking about, as we've gone through this whole night, and I've just been weighing back and forth and hearing all these arguments and thinking that if I've gone all this far, and I've thought about this for weeks, and I'm still not really sure what is the best thing for the city, I do come down to saying, you know, if we can get beneficial use out of the gas, we ought to go for it. In terms of carbon dioxide emissions, there's no difference between flaring and using the reciprocating engines. We have the same greenhouse gas impact. This is considered a renewable. It's a crummy fuel. We've talked about that all evening, but it is considered a renewable, and if we can get some beneficial value out of it, I think that makes sense. I am a little concerned about the dismissal of Alternative 2, and I thank Jackie Gish and some of the public speakers. I Googled just the fresh kills. They are collecting and purifying landfill gas and selling it to National Grid. So this is apparently happening in another part of the country. And I'm a little disappointed that we don't know about that and haven't been tracking that as carefully as we should. I do trust that it's a problematic technology, an expensive technology, and that if we want to get our best bang for the buck in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that's probably not what we would do. So I'm very pleased that we had a discussion about other uses of the landfill, possibly solar in the future. I do think that there's terrific opportunities for that, and so I appreciate the fact that staff is saying this is not at all mutually exclusive. We can do 2 things at once. So again, I've been very torn. I wish we knew a lot more about the purification of landfill gas, how much that actually costs, and whether that's actually doable. But I sense, and I do appreciate the expertise of staff and consultants, that we have looked at this, just like I think the microturbine option has been evaluated. So my bottom line at this point, unless my fellow commissioners can convince me otherwise, is to recommend to go ahead with the project, to recommend that to the Planning Commission and Council that the FEIR is indeed certified. This has been studied for years, and we have the opportunity to, I think, fulfill about 10% of our load using this gas. So having said that, let me circle back to Commissioners Lal and Jasmadarian for their additional comments. Commissioner Lal?
I think the fact that these GHG emissions, these carbon emissions, are going to occur whether or not they are, produced in accordance with or in conjunction with energy production or regardless of energy production, it's persuasive to me. It seems that this beneficial use argument, it definitely carries water with me.
Commissioner Jasmadarian.
I'm going to agree with Commissioner Lal again and say that the beneficial use is very important and that having it at Shoal Canyon is a good idea. I do have the concerns about the wildfire that have been raised, and I would also like to recommend to the city to review the impacted communities for wildfire and develop a robust plan for those communities, along with meeting with our neighbor city in Pasadena, that is Pasadena, and discussing that with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson?
Thank you, President Flanagan. When I've been thinking through the comments that I have heard and the very real concerns of the community members, and I am in the community. I live on Chevy Chase Canyon, so this is something that is in my backyard. That said, the greatest concerns that I heard was we have an earthquake danger, but we would have that regardless with the flaring. I don't know what exactly might happen if we have an earthquake and with a flaring system, and whether that is any more or less dangerous than with the generation plant that has been proposed. The risk of wildfires, again, I'm not sure if the generation plant would increase that risk substantially. But what I do know, working a lot with currently doing about $330 million of new construction at Glendale Community College and working very closely with the city, is that the city fire department is extremely professional, expert, and very stringent on the requirements for the fire code and what they will accept. So I do have great confidence that whatever is the actual plan and the design that would be proposed and would have to be reviewed through all the channels, that the city fire department would be very punctilious about ensuring that the fire mitigations and the plans would be robust and that the would meet the highest standards to minimize a incremental risk to the community to have wildfires. So given that the beneficial use part that right now we have these waste gases that are happening regardless, they're combusting regardless, that to get some benefit seems to be tipping the scale for me, even though, as I said, this is in my backyard. So I think I am going to support what President Flanagan is recommending.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have a motion from the commission?
Oh, President Flanagan, I just had a comment. You skipped over me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you'd been very definitive, but go ahead, please.
Well, okay, thank you. First of all, to have clarity, you need a crystal ball that sees the future. I do not, and therefore my clarity is limited by the information I have, which is the staff report, their professionalism, and that is what I am relying on. The facts, the extensive information, the extensive research that they have done. I am not discounting the concerns of the community that brought their concerns. Those are very legitimate concerns. However, staff has taken those into consideration, and based on that, I was confident in my recommendation or position. It's not because I have some sort of a crystal ball that I could see the future. But there's a lot of variables that could change things. But what we have now in front of us is complete, in my opinion. It's professional. It is the best information we could get. And I think based on those, I would support, as I had indicated before, and I would support the motion that you had made. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Do we have a motion?
I make a motion. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I was going to suggest a motion that we recommend acceptance of the certification of the EIR, the final EIR, and recommend moving forward with the generation plant as recommended by city staff with the caveat that there be a close reexamination of option 2 to understand the costs and feasibility. The second point would be that we take very seriously the concerns about fire danger and any increased risk of wildfire hazards, not just when the plant is running, but during construction, and what would be the mitigation plan for it. Those would be the two key caveats that I would strongly urge as part of the motion to recommend acceptance of the EIR and the recommendation to move forward with the project.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Do we have a second to that motion with the caveats, which I think are extremely well stated?
I have a separate motion.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm not against the consideration of the second, as Commissioner Peterson has indicated. However, staff has studied that, and they have provided their recommendation on that as not the best choice. With that said, this particular project has been ongoing for 4 years. For 4 years, we've been flaring with no beneficial use whatsoever. And I am concerned if we put that kind of a caveat, this project could be further delayed. So with that concern, and with that concern, I make a motion to accept the final EIR as proposed and to approve the project with the concerns that Commissioner Jasmine said with regards to reviewing the fire mitigation issues as necessary further. That's the motion.
So your motion is approve the FEIR with basically maximizing mitigation measures that address the community concerns, but not...
With regards to the fire that Commissioner Jasmine has indicated.
Okay.
Because there's many levels of mitigations. At this point, Commissioner Jasmine indicated concerns about fire, and it's just a double check or review that there's no fire concerns, or whatever there are, we have mitigation sufficiently for it.
While I appreciate these comments, and while I appreciate Commissioner Peterson's comments about examining alternative number 2, I think, Commissioner Kadikian, you're making a really good point. This project has been considered and discussed for a long time, and that could seriously delay the project from moving forward. Do we have, I guess we've got 2 motions. Do we have a second for Commissioner Kadikian's motion to approve the project or approve the FEIR as proposed with taking into consideration the fire concerns and mitigating the fire concerns? Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second. This is Commissioner Jasmine.
Okay. Shall we take I guess the proper thing would be to do a roll call at this point? Okay,
Correct.
so let's do the roll call, please.
Commissioner Jasmine?
Aye.
Commissioner Kadikian?
Yes.
Commissioner Law?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
President Flanagan?
Yes. Thank you all. Are we, is the next item to adjourn, or do we have other business to knock out tonight while we're all hanging out here?
Last item is adjournment.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
I motion.
Second? We're
Second.
adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.